My name is Catherine Blake. I'm 31 years old, and the moment my relationship ended didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It happened in a living room full of people, in a tone so sharp and deliberate that it left no room for misunderstanding. I manage a neighborhood bakery in Portland. My days start before sunrise because bread doesn't wait for anyone. By 5 a.m., I'm already inside the shop, checking ovens, reviewing deliveries, making sure everything is ready before the first wave of customers walks in. It's steady work, predictable, the kind of routine that makes sense when everything else doesn't. After years of saving, I rented a small house not far from the bakery. It's nothing flashy, just quiet, functional, and mine. My boyfriend was Daniel Carter. He's 29 and works as a veterinarian at a busy animal clinic across town. When everything fell apart, we had been together just over 3 years, and he had been living with me for about a year. From the outside, we looked stable. We split groceries and utilities. The house was in my name since I moved in before we met, but that never seemed to matter. At least not at first. Daniel is the kind of person people notice when he walks into a room. Confident, polished. His job puts him in constant contact with clients, surgeries, emergencies, situations where people naturally respect him. My world is quieter. Flour, ovens, early mornings, regular customers who don't ask for much beyond coffee and consistency. For the first couple of years, it worked. He said he liked that I was reliable. I liked that he had ambition. People called us practical. But about 8 months before everything ended, something started to shift. At first, it was small. Comments that didn't quite land right. He started joking about my car, an older sedan that runs perfectly fine. At first, it was just a passing remark. Then it became something he would bring up around his coworkers, like it was part of a story he wanted people to laugh at. I told myself it didn't matter. What he didn't know was that during those same months, I had been planning something. Quietly, carefully. I had started saving for a ring. I didn't rush it. My schedule is early, his is unpredictable. I wanted the moment to feel right, not rushed, not forced. Daniel has always been close to his family. His parents host dinners almost every month, and he rarely misses them. So when his mother invited us to a Sunday dinner about 4 months before everything happened, I decided that would be the moment. The ring I chose wasn't extravagant, but it was thoughtful, simple, elegant, something that made sense for the life we actually lived, not the one he sometimes pretended we had. It cost more than anything I had ever bought before. Dinner started like it always did. His father was outside grilling. People were talking about work, pets, small updates that fill space without meaning much. Daniel was laughing with his sister, helping his mom bring dishes to the table. Everything felt normal. Maybe that's why I believed it would go the way I imagined. After dinner, everyone moved into the living room. Conversations overlapped, voices blending into something warm and familiar. That was when I stood up. I remember feeling nervous, but certain. I asked Daniel if he could come stand with me for a second. He looked confused, but he walked over. The room slowly quieted. People notice these things. They always do. I reached into my pocket, took out the ring, and lowered myself onto one knee. I told him that the last 3 years had mattered to me, that I wanted to build something real together. Then I opened the box. For about 2 seconds, everything went completely still. Daniel looked at the ring, then at me, and something in his expression changed. "You're pathetic and cheap." The words didn't land like an accident. They landed like a decision. The room went silent. For a second, I thought he might be joking. He had a habit of saying sharp things sometimes, especially around his family. But the way he was looking at the ring told me immediately this wasn't a joke. He let out a short laugh. Not nervous. Not uncertain. The kind of laugh that invites other people to join in. "A bakery manager proposing with something like this," he said, glancing around the room. "Do you know what some of the doctors at my clinic give their partners?" His sister shifted uncomfortably on the couch. His mother tried to say his name, quietly, like she wanted him to stop. He didn't. He reached down, took the ring from the box. For a moment, I thought maybe he was going to hand it back. Instead, he looked straight at me and repeated it, louder this time. "You're pathetic and cheap." Then he tossed the ring across the room, like it meant nothing. The box slid across the floor and stopped near the coffee table. No one moved. No one spoke. I stood up slowly, walked over, and picked it up. The ring was still inside. I closed the box and held it in my hand for a second. There are moments where everything becomes very clear. This was one of them. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't try to explain myself. I just said I was leaving. Daniel rolled his eyes like I was overreacting, but I was already walking toward the door. His father followed me into the hallway and said he was sorry. I told him it was fine. I thanked him for dinner, and then I left. The drive home took about 30 minutes. My phone kept buzzing in the passenger seat. I didn't check it, not once. Because somewhere between his voice in that living room and the quiet of the road, I already knew something had ended. And it wasn't going to be fixed with another conversation. When I got home, I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stood in the kitchen for a moment, just thinking. Then I made a decision. Daniel had moved into my place a year earlier, and that night, he was moving out. I didn't rush once I made the decision. That was the strange part. You would think anger would make a person frantic, loud, reckless. But what I felt standing there in my kitchen wasn't rage. It was clarity. Cold, clean, unmistakable clarity. Something had broken in that living room, and no apology dressed up as a misunderstanding was going to put it back together. So I went to the garage, pulled out a few empty boxes, and started packing Daniel's things. Most of his clothes were in my bedroom closet. Shirts, jeans, jackets, his clinic scrubs, gym clothes, shoes lined up along the wall, like he still belonged there. I folded everything methodically and placed it into boxes. Not because I was trying to be kind, because I wanted no part of this to feel chaotic. I wanted him to see exactly what he had done. I wanted the silence of it to say what I wasn't going to waste energy saying out loud. His extra things were in the spare room dresser. I emptied that next. Chargers, books, toiletries, that expensive cologne he used too much. The watch case he always left half open. Every item I touched felt like a piece of a life I had been carrying long after it had already started slipping out of my hands. At some point, my phone stopped buzzing long enough for the house to feel unnaturally quiet. Then it started again. I left it face down on the kitchen counter while I kept working. Eventually, I checked it. 12 missed calls. Several messages. The first few were angry. Where did you go? Why would you leave like that? You embarrassed me in front of everyone. That one almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was so perfectly him. He could humiliate me in front of his entire family and still find a way to cast himself as the wounded one. The later messages were worse, sharper, more demanding. He said I needed to stop being dramatic and come back so we could talk like adults. I didn't respond. I kept packing. That was the night I realized something important about humiliation. It doesn't always leave you destroyed. Sometimes it burns so hot and so clean that it cauterizes everything at once. There was no confusion left in me. No bargaining. No instinct to chase after the version of him I thought I loved. The person I loved would never have looked at me on one knee and made me the punchline of the room. An hour later, most of his belongings were boxed and stacked neatly by the front door. Clothes, shoes, bathroom things in a smaller bag on top. I even packed his toothbrush. There was something brutally final about that little detail. Relationships don't always end with one big, dramatic moment. Sometimes they end with a toothbrush in a plastic bag and the quiet knowledge that it will never go back into the holder beside yours again. I had just taped the last box shut when headlights swept across the living room wall. A car door slammed, then keys in the front lock. Daniel walked in, still wearing the same expression he had at his parents' house, irritated, superior, like he fully expected the rest of the world to correct itself around his mood. But the second he saw the boxes by the door, that expression cracked. He stopped just inside the entryway and stared at them. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he looked at me and asked, "What the hell is all this supposed to mean?" His voice had that edge in it, the same one he used when he was trying to regain control of a situation before he actually understood it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even move from where I was standing near the kitchen. "It means you're moving out." He blinked, like the words took a second to settle in. "Oh my God, Catherine, are you serious?" "Yes." He gave a short, disbelieving laugh and shut the door behind him harder than necessary. "You packed my stuff because of a joke?" I remember the way he said joke, like that word was supposed to erase everything, like intention mattered more than impact, like cruelty could become harmless if you called it humor quickly enough. "It wasn't a joke," I said. "You insulted me in front of your entire family. Twice. Then you threw the ring." He dropped his keys onto the table with a sharp, metallic sound. "I said something stupid. It was awkward. You blew it out of proportion by storming out." I looked at him for a second, really looked at him, and I think that was the moment some last fragile illusion finally died, because he wasn't embarrassed, he wasn't sorry, he wasn't shaken by what he had done. He was annoyed that I had responded in a way he couldn't control. "You called me pathetic and cheap," I said, "in front of your parents, your sister, your cousins. Then you laughed." He crossed his arms. Because the ring was embarrassing, Catherine. I mean, come on, you had to know that. The words landed hard, not because they surprised me, but because they confirmed everything. There was no apology coming, no moment of remorse hidden behind the arrogance. This was who he was choosing to be when it mattered. And that, I said quietly, is exactly why this is over. His face changed then. Not softer, harder. You can't just throw me out. I can. This is insane. No, I said. What was insane was me thinking this relationship was still built on respect. He stared at me, jaw tight, like he was trying to decide whether intimidation would still work. It had, sometimes. Not in obvious ways. Not with shouting or threats, but with tone, with dismissiveness, with that look people use when they want you to feel small enough to second-guess what you know is true. It didn't work anymore. The house is in my name, I said. The lease is mine. The utilities are mine. You moved in informally. Your things are packed. You can take them tonight or come back tomorrow with your sister and pick up whatever doesn't fit. His laugh this time was colder. So that's it? 3 years and you're acting like I'm some stranger? I held his gaze. No, I'm acting like someone who finally listened to what you think of me. That silenced him for a second. Then he switched tactics, just like I knew he would. His voice softened, but not in a real way, in a calculated way. Catherine, you're emotional right now. That sentence almost undid every last bit of patience I had left, not because it hurt, because it was so predictable. Humiliate her, blame her, minimize it, then call her emotional when she refuses to accept it. It would have been insulting if it weren't so transparent. I'm not emotional, I said. I'm done. For the first time all night, he seemed to actually understand that I meant it. He looked at the boxes again, then back at me. Where exactly do you expect me to go? I almost said, you should have thought about that before tonight. But I didn't. I didn't need to. The point wasn't to win a line. The point was to end the conversation. That's not my problem anymore. His expression twisted. Unbelievable. I walked to the front door and opened it. The cool night air moved through the hallway between us. Leave your key on the table before you go, I said. He stared at me for several long seconds. I could feel the anger in him shifting, looking for a place to land. But anger only works when the other person is willing to absorb it. I wasn't. Finally, he yanked the key from his keychain and dropped it onto the table so hard it bounced once against the wood. Fine. Then he grabbed 2 boxes and shoved past me toward the porch. He came back for the rest in silence. No apology, no goodbye, just the sound of cardboard scraping, the front steps creaking, his car trunk slamming shut. On the last trip, he stood outside the doorway with the final box in his hands and looked at me with an expression that was half fury, half disbelief. You're going to regret this, he said. There it was. The final line people use when they still believe the future belongs to them. A warning wrapped in wounded pride. A promise that I would miss him, that I would realize what I'd lost, that somehow he would still end up being the one with the power. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, and after a few seconds, he turned and walked away. I closed the door gently, not hard, not dramatically, just firmly enough for the latch to catch. Then I locked it. The first thing I did was pick up my phone and block his number. After that, I blocked him everywhere else. Social media, messaging apps, everything. I didn't want access. I didn't want updates. I didn't want late-night attempts at rewriting what had happened. I wanted silence. Real silence. The kind that lets a person hear themselves think again. The next morning, my alarm went off at 4:30 like it always did. For a few blurred seconds, I forgot. Then I opened the closet to get dressed and saw the empty half where his clothes had been. And remembered. I stood there longer than I expected to. Not crying, not shaking, just looking at the empty space. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after you stop waiting for someone to become who they promised they were. It isn't happiness exactly. Not at first. More like the absence of confusion. A room after the shouting stops. A sky after a storm moves on. By 5 a.m., I was at the bakery. The ovens were warm. Deliveries were already stacked near the back entrance. The first batch of bread needed checking. The coffee needed brewing. And by 6, the regular customers were coming in, half awake and grateful for routine. The rhythm of work carried me the way it always had. That morning, more than ever, I needed that. Something simple. Something steady. Something that didn't ask me to explain what had happened. Daniel tried to reach me over the next few days in the only ways he still could. An email slipped into my spam folder. I deleted it without opening it. A friend of his viewed one of the bakery's public pages 3 times in one afternoon. I ignored that too. As far as I was concerned, the relationship had ended the moment he turned my proposal into a performance for his family. 2 weeks passed. Then on a Saturday morning, just after the breakfast rush had started to thin, a man stepped up to the counter and I recognized him immediately. Ryan Mitchell, one of Daniel's co-workers from the clinic. I had met him once before at a staff event. He looked slightly uncomfortable seeing me behind the register, like he was already regretting whatever had brought him there. He ordered coffee, waited until the line cleared, then asked if we could talk for a minute. Something in his tone made me step outside, with him, near the side of the building where delivery trucks usually stopped. He rubbed the back of his neck and looked at me for a second before speaking. "I feel like you should know what's been going on at the clinic," he said. I said nothing. And then he told me Daniel had been telling people a very different version of our breakup. According to him, he had turned down my proposal because I was financially irresponsible, that I was unstable, bad with money, barely holding things together. I listened without reacting. That part didn't surprise me as much as maybe it should have. Pride scrambles people after they lose control of a story. I could already picture the tone he would have used, casual and wounded at the same time, building himself into the sensible one and me into the burden he had bravely escaped. What I didn't know yet, what Ryan was about to tell me, was that Daniel had repeated that lie in front of the wrong person. And that was where the first real crack in his perfect little version of reality began to spread. Ryan shifted his weight slightly, like he was deciding how much to say and how directly to say it. He told that story during lunch, he continued, a few days ago. Just casually, like he's been doing with everyone else. I leaned against the wall of the building, arms loosely folded, letting him talk. At first, nobody really questioned it, Ryan said. Breakups happen. People take sides in their own version of things, but there was a senior vet sitting at the table that day, Dr. Lawson. The name didn't mean anything to me. Ryan noticed that and added, "He's been at the clinic for years. People listen to him." I nodded slightly. And apparently, Ryan went on, his younger brother comes into your bakery almost every morning. That caught my attention, but I didn't interrupt. He talks about it all the time, says the place is always busy, says the manager there runs things really well, expansions, new equipment, steady customers, that kind of thing. I could already see where this was going. So when Daniel started describing you as someone who could barely support herself, Ryan said carefully, Dr. Lawson asked a few questions. What kind of questions? I asked. Simple ones at first. Where you worked, how long you'd been managing the bakery, whether the place was struggling or doing well. I let out a slow breath. And Daniel? Ryan gave a short, almost uncomfortable smile. He doubled down. Of course he did. He said you were constantly stressed about money, Ryan continued. That the ring was proof of it, that he had been helping you out more than you let on. I shook my head slightly, not out of disbelief, but recognition. That instinct to protect his image at any cost, even if it meant rewriting reality completely. That's when Dr. Lawson pushed back, Ryan said. Not aggressively, just directly. He said it didn't line up with what he'd heard, that the bakery seemed to be doing well, that the manager there sounded competent, stable. And Daniel, I asked again? He tried to brush it off, Ryan said, but by then people were paying attention. I could picture it clearly. A table that had started as casual conversations slowly tightening, people listening more carefully, comparing what they were hearing to what they already knew. Other coworkers started asking questions, Ryan went on. Nothing hostile, just normal things. How long you lived together. Why he stayed in a relationship with someone he claimed was struggling so much. Why he'd talked about your job differently before. I felt a quiet shift inside me. Not satisfaction exactly, just inevitability. Daniel had already told different versions of the story to different people, Ryan said. Some remembered him talking about your work like it was completely normal. Others remembered him saying the bakery was always busy. So when he tried to spin this new version, it didn't hold. He paused for a second, then added, once people started comparing notes, the inconsistencies became obvious. I looked out towards the street, watching a car pass slowly. And Dr. Lawson? I asked. He ended the conversation after a while, Ryan said. Went back to work, but the damage was already done. I nodded. Because that's how it usually happens. Not with one dramatic moment, but with a shift. A change in how people look at you, how they listen, how much they believe. After that, Ryan continued, things at the clinic started feeling different. How? People weren't as quick to take what Daniel said at face value, he said. There were side conversations, questions. Nothing direct at first, but you could feel it. I didn't need more detail than that. I knew exactly what that kind of environment felt like. Once doubt enters a room, it doesn't leave quietly. Ryan hesitated, then kept going. And Daniel didn't handle it well. I almost smiled at that, but didn't. He got defensive, Ryan said. Small disagreements started turning into arguments. He snapped at a couple of coworkers over things that normally wouldn't matter. A few clients complained about his attitude during appointments. That doesn't sound like him, I said, though even as I said it, I realized it wasn't entirely true. It didn't sound like the version of him he liked to present, but the edge underneath it, I had seen that before. Ryan nodded. It wasn't all at once, just a pattern, over a couple of weeks. And management? I asked. They noticed, he said, especially when he started showing up late. That part didn't surprise me at all. Veterinary clinics run on tight schedules, Ryan explained. Even small delays throw everything off. He'd already been warned about it before, but it started happening more often. I folded my arms a little tighter, not because I was cold, but because something about hearing all of this made me instinctively close in on myself. Not out of guilt, out of distance. Like I needed to remind myself that this was no longer my situation to manage. There was also his living situation, Ryan added carefully. I glanced at him. What about it? He moved back in with his parents after that night, Ryan said. And from what I've heard, it hasn't been smooth. I let out a quiet breath. Daniel had always talked about independence, about not wanting to rely on anyone, about building his own life. Going back to his parents' house after everything that happened, that alone would have been enough to unsettle him. There have been arguments, Ryan said. Pretty regularly. I nodded once. By the end of the first month, he continued, he looked different, tired, irritated all the time, like everything was piling up. I didn't ask what everything meant. I already knew. Reputation slipping. Control fading. The narrative no longer bending the way he wanted it to. Ryan pushed off the wall slightly, then leaned back again, like he wasn't quite finished. That would have been manageable on its own, he said. People go through rough patches, but then something else happened. I turned my attention back to him. A few weeks ago, he said, there was an incident during a routine appointment. What kind of incident? I asked. He hesitated. Nothing catastrophic. The animal was fine, but Daniel made a mistake, a basic one. Another vet had to step in and correct it. I felt a subtle tightening in my chest. Not sympathy, not exactly, just the recognition that this was moving beyond reputation and into something more concrete. Management reviewed it, Ryan continued, and when they didn't just look at that one situation. They looked at everything. I could almost see the list forming in my head. Complaints, lateness, arguments, inconsistencies. They pulled together feedback from clients, Ryan said. Notes from previous warnings, reports from coworkers, the whole picture. And, I asked quietly, Ryan exhaled slowly. A week later, they let him go. The words settled between us without drama. No shouting. No confrontation. Just an outcome. How did he take it? I asked after a moment. Not well, Ryan said, but not loudly either. It wasn't a scene. They called him into the office, explained the decision, and that was it. I nodded again. Sometimes the quiet endings hit harder than the loud ones. Losing that job hit him harder than the breakup, Ryan added. Positions like that are competitive, and people talk, not officially, but enough. I understood exactly what he meant. Reputation travels faster than truth in places like that. And now, I asked? He's been trying to find another position, Ryan said, but it's not going well. Last I heard, he's still at his parents' place. No job, no clear next step. I looked down at my hands for a second, then back up. There was a strange stillness inside me. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Just a quiet recognition of cause and effect. Ryan studied my face like he was expecting some kind of reaction. You didn't know any of this? He asked. No, I said simply. I blocked him the night he left. He nodded slowly. Honestly, he said, I wasn't sure if I should tell you, but it didn't feel right knowing what he's been saying and how it's been playing out. I appreciate it, I said. And I meant that, not because I needed the information, but because it confirmed something I had already understood the moment I picked that ring up off the floor. You don't have to fight someone who's already undoing themselves. Ryan gave a small nod, like a weight had lifted slightly, then pushed himself away from the wall. I should get back, he said. Yeah, I replied. He walked back inside the bakery, and a minute later I followed. The warmth of the ovens hit me immediately, the smell of fresh bread, the quiet hum of a place that runs on routine instead of chaos. I stepped behind the counter, picked up where I left off, and didn't think about Daniel again for the rest of the day. Not because I was avoiding it, because for the first time in a long time, there was nothing left to figure out. For a while, that was the end of it. The bakery stayed busy. Mornings came early, just like they always had. Dough needed to be checked, ovens needed to be watched. Customers came in half awake and left with coffee and something warm in their hands. There's a comfort in repetition, in knowing exactly what the next hour is going to look like. And for the first time in months, my life felt quiet. Not empty, just steady. That quiet stretched into weeks, then into nearly 2 months. I didn't hear from Daniel again, not directly, not indirectly, and eventually, even the memory of that night, the living room, the laughter, the ring sliding across the floor, started to feel less like something sharp and immediate, and more like something distant, something that had already taken everything it was going to take from me. That should have been the end of the story. But life doesn't always close things that neatly. It was a Thursday evening, just after closing. I had locked the front door of the bakery and was finishing up the last few things behind the counter, counting the register, wiping down surfaces, the kind of small, repetitive tasks that signal the day is over. My phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail. Most of the time, unknown numbers mean nothing I need to deal with immediately, but occasionally suppliers call from different lines, so I answered it without thinking too much about it. Hello? For a second, there was only silence. Then, Catherine. I recognized his voice immediately. It's strange how quickly your body remembers something your mind has already moved on from. There was a flicker of something in my chest. Not emotion exactly, more like recognition. Daniel. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he exhaled quietly. I wasn't sure if you'd pick up. I walked over to the counter, leaning against it slightly, my gaze drifting toward the darkened front windows. What do you want? I asked. No anger, no edge, just direct. There was another pause on the line. I was hoping we could talk, he said finally, just for a few minutes. His tone was different, completely different. Gone was the sharpness, the confidence, the subtle arrogance that used to sit underneath everything he said. What replaced it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate in an obvious way, but it was softer, careful. Like he was choosing every word instead of assuming they would land the way he wanted. I don't think there's anything to talk about, I said. I know, he replied quickly. I mean, I get why you'd say that. I wanted to clear the air. Clear the air. I almost repeated the phrase back to him. Instead, I stayed quiet. He took that silence as permission to keep going. Things haven't been great, he said. Since everything happened, I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I lost the job, he added after a moment, like saying it out loud made it more real. I heard, I said. There was a slight shift in his breathing. Of course you did. Not defensive, just resigned. It kind of spiraled, he continued. After that day, at the clinic, I could hear it now. The weight in his voice. Not just frustration. Something heavier. The kind of tone people have when they're finally forced to look at the consequences of their own decisions without any buffer. People started asking questions, he said, about what I told them, about you, and it just got out of control. I closed my eyes briefly, not because I didn't want to hear it, but because I already knew how the story went. It wasn't supposed to turn into all that, he added. There it was again. That subtle distance from responsibility. Not I did this. But it wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't correct him. I just listened. Then work started getting tense, he said, and I made a mistake. Nothing serious, but enough that they looked into everything else. And then he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. And now I asked. There was a pause. I'm still at my parents' place, he said, trying to find something else. I nodded slightly, even though he couldn't see it. Catherine, his voice shifted again, softer, more uncertain. I know I messed up. That was the closest thing to an apology I had heard from him. I said things I shouldn't have said, he continued. That night, I didn't mean it the way it came out. I opened my eyes and looked at my reflection, faintly visible in the dark glass of the bakery window. You meant it enough to say it twice, I replied. Silence. Then a quiet, yeah. Another pause. He started again, then stopped, like he was trying to figure out how to say something that didn't come naturally to him. I was wondering if maybe we could meet, he said finally. Talk in person. See if there's a way to fix things. There it was, the real reason for the call. Not closure, not clarity. Reversal. I leaned back against the counter, letting the silence stretch just long enough to feel intentional. In that moment, something became very clear to me. The night I stood in his parents' living room holding that ring, Daniel believed he had all the leverage. He believed I would stay, that I would absorb the humiliation, adjust myself, try harder, prove something, chase after his approval. Instead, I walked away, and everything that followed, he hadn't expected. Now the balance had shifted, not because I had done anything to force it, but because he had. "There's nothing to fix," I said calmly. The words landed differently this time. Not defensive, not emotional. Final. "I don't mean that in a harsh way," I added. "I just mean the relationship ended that night." I could hear his breathing on the other end. Slower now. "I didn't argue with you," I continued. "I didn't insult you back. I didn't try to convince you of anything. I just left. Because once someone chooses to treat you like that in front of everyone who matters to them, that's not something you rebuild from." There was a long silence, the kind that stretches long enough to say everything that words don't. "I get that," he said finally. And for the first time, it sounded like he actually might. Before I could say anything else, he asked quietly, "Did you keep the ring?" I glanced down at my hand, even though it wasn't there. "Yes," I said. Another pause. "I thought you might have returned it," he said. "No." "Why?" I thought about that for a second. Because it hurt. Because it mattered. Because it reminded me of exactly where everything changed. "Because it's a good reminder," I said. "It cost me a few $1,000s, but it saved me from a much bigger mistake." He didn't respond to that. There was nothing to argue with. After a few seconds, I pushed myself off the counter and walked toward the back of the bakery, turning off the last set of lights. "I hope things work out for you," I said. And I meant that, not in a sentimental way, in a distant, honest one. "You too," he replied quietly. Then the line went dead. I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, listening to the silence that followed. No tension. No second thoughts. Just quiet. I slipped my phone into my bag, turned off the final light, and stepped outside, locking the door behind me. The air was cool. The street was mostly empty. And for the first time since that night, it felt like everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. My name is Wendy Collins. I'm 33 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I ended a 2-year relationship without raising my voice once, without a fight, and without giving him a second chance to explain what he already meant the first time. I work in IT support for a mid-sized logistics company. My life, up until recently, followed a rhythm that made sense. Gym before work, long hours behind a screen, home by 6:30 most nights. I pay my bills on time, I keep my space clean. Nothing flashy, nothing performative, just stable, intentional, mine. My boyfriend, Victor, is 29. We'd been together a little over 2 years, living together for the last 8 months. He works in event marketing, fast-paced, social, always surrounded by people who talk louder than they listen. He thrives in that world, always planning the next trip, the next night out, the next moment that needs to be captured and posted. On paper, we made sense. I handled structure. He brought energy. That's what I told myself. Looking back now, I think what I really meant was I anchored things and he floated. Last month, he planned a 4-day trip to Miami with 3 of his closest friends. I drove him to the airport at 5 a.m. on a Thursday, paid for his food the night before because he said he was too stressed to cook. Normal things, thoughtful things, the kind of things you don't keep score of when you believe you're building something mutual. The night before he left, we were sitting at the kitchen counter while he packed. He'd had a couple of drinks and was on a video call with one of his friends, laughing, loud, performing, even in his own home. At some point, he muted the call, turned to me, and said it like it was nothing. "My friends think you're kind of a joke. And honestly, they're not wrong." I remember thinking I misheard him. I actually laughed. He didn't. He shrugged like he was explaining something obvious. Said they think I'm boring, predictable, not really on his level socially. Then he added, almost casually, that sometimes he agreed, that I could try harder, that I was lucky he even liked stable girls. He said it like it was generosity, like I should be grateful. I didn't argue. I didn't ask him to explain. I didn't even ask him to repeat it. I just looked at him and asked what time his flight boarded, and he smiled, like the conversation had been productive. The next morning, I drove him to the airport, helped him unload his bag, told him to text me when he landed. He kissed me quickly, already distracted, already somewhere else, and walked inside without looking back. That was the last time he saw the apartment the way he left it. When I got back to the parking lot, I sat there for a full minute before going upstairs. Not because I was emotional, I wasn't crying, I wasn't angry. I was thinking. Because the truth is, Victor had said things like that before, just never that directly. Little comments about how my clothes were too plain, how I should post more, how his friends' girlfriends were more fun. I always brushed it off because none of it actually mattered to me. But this was different. This wasn't preference. This was perception. If his friends thought I was a joke, it meant he'd let them. People don't form that kind of opinion without reinforcement, and the fact that he said they weren't wrong meant he agreed. That was enough. I walked upstairs, unlocked the door, and stepped into the apartment we both technically lived in, but that I paid for, maintained, and built long before he moved in. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop. The first thing I checked was the lease. Month to month after the first year. Only my name. Good. The second thing I did was log into our shared account, the one we use for groceries and small expenses. I transferred his portion back into his personal account, took screenshots, documented everything, not because I expected a fight, because I expect clarity. Then I called the leasing office. I didn't dramatize anything. I didn't mention the relationship. I asked a simple question: what the process would be if I needed to remove an occupant who wasn't on the lease but had been approved to live there. The answer was simple. I could revoke his occupancy in writing. Clean, legal, final. That mattered to me. I wasn't going to do anything messy. No emotional outbursts, no impulsive decisions, no changing locks or throwing things out. If I was going to end this, I was going to do it properly. By noon, I'd taken a half day off work. I went downstairs, grabbed moving boxes from storage, and came back up to the apartment that was already starting to feel different. Quieter, clearer. I started with his clothes. Folded everything neatly. Shirts, pants, shoes lined up carefully. Toiletries packed in separate boxes. Nothing thrown, nothing rushed. I'm not petty. I'm thorough. Around 3 p.m., my phone buzzed. A selfie from him on the plane, sunglasses on, that same easy smile, a heart emoji in the caption. I looked at it for a second. Then I replied with a thumbs up and kept packing. By the second day of Victor's trip, the apartment didn't feel empty. It felt corrected. Not hollow, not lonely, just recalibrated. Like something had been slightly off for months, and I had finally adjusted it back into place. Everything that was mine had returned to where it originally belonged. The living room looked cleaner without the extra furniture he insisted on buying for aesthetics. The corners felt quieter without the ring light he never put away. Even the kitchen felt different, less cluttered, less staged. His presence had always been loud, even when he wasn't speaking. Now it wasn't, and I noticed the difference immediately. I stood in the second bedroom, looking at the stack of boxes I had packed over the last 36 hours. 6 medium boxes of clothes. 2 smaller ones for bathroom items and cosmetics. 1 box of random decor he'd added without asking. His suitcase. The garment rack he said we needed. Everything labeled, everything documented. I opened my notes app and double-checked the list, not because I expected him to argue, but because I don't leave room for ambiguity. If there was going to be an ending, it would be clean. Thursday night, my phone buzzed again. A video this time. Loud music, neon lights, a rooftop bar somewhere in Miami. Victor in the center of it, laughing, drink in hand, his friends crowding into the frame like they were performing for an invisible audience. The caption read, "Living my best life." I watched it once. Then again, slower. One of the women, his ex-girlfriend Kayla, the same one he insisted he was still cool with, leaned into the camera, her voice cutting through the music just enough. "Next trip, we're upgrading you properly." She laughed. Victor laughed louder. Didn't correct her. Didn't even hesitate. I paused the video right there. That moment, small, almost forgettable to anyone else, was the clearest confirmation I needed. It wasn't just what he said to me. It was what he allowed other people to say about me, and what he chose to agree with when I wasn't in the room. I locked my phone and set it face down on the counter. Then I went back to work. Friday morning, I sent the formal email to the leasing office. Short, direct, no emotion. I was revoking his occupancy, effective immediately upon his return. They replied within the hour, confirming the update. I printed the email, slipped it into a folder with a copy of the lease, everything documented, everything aligned. Then I made one call. Marcus. He's been my friend for years, the kind of person who doesn't ask unnecessary questions, the kind who understands tone more than words. I might need help moving a few things into storage, I told him. He didn't ask why, just said, "Tell me when." That was enough. Saturday morning, I rented a small, climate-controlled storage unit 5 minutes away. Nothing expensive, just clean, temporary, functional. I loaded the first set of boxes into my car. Clothes, shoes, smaller items. Drove them over. Came back. Loaded the rest. 2 trips. No rush, no hesitation. Just completion. By late afternoon, everything that belonged to Victor was no longer in my apartment. Not hidden, not thrown away. Just relocated. Properly. I stood in the doorway of the now empty second bedroom for a moment, looking at the space he used to occupy. It didn't feel like something was missing. It felt like something had been removed. There's a difference. Before I left for the storage unit the second time, I walked into the kitchen and picked up the framed photo from last New Year's Eve. We were standing close together in it, smiling, arms wrapped around each other like we understood something permanent. I looked at it for a few seconds. Then I placed it face down on the counter. Not broken, not destroyed, just no longer on display. That night, around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Victor, miss me yet? I stared at the message. Simple, casual, unaware. Like nothing had shifted. Like nothing was waiting for him. I typed slowly. I think we need to talk when you get back. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then a laughing emoji. Don't be dramatic. I didn't reply. Sunday evening, he sent his flight details. Landing Monday at 4:15 p.m. Then a follow-up. Can you pick me up? I read it. Let it sit for a moment. Then replied. I have work. Safe flight. That was the last message I sent him before he came home. Monday morning, I didn't go to work. Not because I needed time to process. Because I had one last thing to finalize. I cleaned the apartment. Not obsessively. Just thoroughly. Surfaces wiped down. Floors vacuumed. Everything reset to how it had been before he moved in. No trace of him left behind. Except the silence. At 4:37 p.m., my phone buzzed. Just landed. Baggage claim is insane. Where are you? I didn't respond. At 5:12, he called. I let it ring. At 5:19, another text. Are you seriously not picking me up? I was sitting on the couch at that point, the apartment quiet around me. No background noise, no distractions, just stillness. At 5:30, I finally replied. You'll need to Uber. The response came instantly. Why? I kept it simple. We need to talk when you get here. The typing bubble appeared, paused, disappeared, then came a long paragraph about how tired he was, how crazy the trip had been, how this better not be about what he said, because I was being too sensitive. Sensitive. I read it once. Didn't respond. At 6:08 p.m., I heard the elevator down the hall. At 6:11, the door unlocked. And for the first time since Thursday morning, Victor stepped back into a space that no longer belonged to him. He walked in dragging his suitcase behind him, sunglasses still on, skin slightly sunburned, like he'd just stepped out of a different world entirely. He took 2 steps inside, then stopped. It wasn't immediate panic, not even confusion at first, just a pause, like something didn't quite match what he expected. His eyes moved across the living room. The corner where his ring light used to be, empty. The bar cart he insisted we needed, gone. The pile of throw pillows he liked but never used, missing. Where's my mirror? He asked, like that was the most important detail. In storage, I said. He turned toward me slowly. What do you mean storage? I stood up from the couch, calm, steady, already past the part where emotions make things messy. Your things are packed. They're in a storage unit 5 minutes away. I paid for the first month. After that, it's yours to handle. For a second, he just blinked at me, like his brain hadn't caught up yet. What are you talking about? I told you we needed to talk. He let go of his suitcase. It tipped slightly, then settled. He looked around again, this time more carefully. The shoe rack, gone. The wall art he hung without asking, gone. The small details he assumed would always be there, gone. You're joking, he said. No, he laughed. That same sharp, dismissive laugh I'd heard before. Is this about what I'd said before the trip? Oh my God, you're actually this insecure? I shook my head slightly. It's not about insecurity, it's about agreement. He frowned. What? Your friends think I'm a joke because you let them. And you said they're not wrong. He rolled his eyes, already irritated. It was a comment, Wendy. You're blowing this way out of proportion. No, I said evenly. I'm reacting proportionally. That was the first moment his expression changed. Not guilt, not regret, annoyance. So what, he said. You're kicking me out? I didn't raise my voice. You don't live here anymore. Silence. He stared at me like I'd just said something absurd. Then he laughed again, but it sounded thinner this time. My clothes are here. Not anymore. His jaw tightened. I told you, they're boxed. I have an inventory list and photos. You can pick them up tonight or tomorrow. I'll give you the storage key once you confirm everything's there. He took a step closer. You're insane. I met his gaze without shifting. I'm decisive. That seemed to irritate him more than anything else. He lowered his voice, like this was something he could still smooth over if he adjusted his tone. You're seriously throwing away 2 years because I said my friends think you're boring? I corrected him quietly. Because you agreed with them, and because you're comfortable disrespecting me publicly. I never disrespected you publicly. You laughed when your friend said you should upgrade. That landed. I saw it in the way his expression paused, just for a second. Then he shook it off. That was a joke. Jokes are funny, I said. That wasn't. He crossed his arms. So what? You want me to apologize? No. That caught him off guard. He blinked. No? I don't want an apology, I said. I want alignment. And we don't have it. He started pacing now, agitated, searching for a version of this conversation where he still had control. You're overreacting, he said. Everyone talks about their relationships with their friends. That's normal. Talking is normal, I replied. Undermining isn't. He shook his head frustrated. You're just mad because you're not like their girlfriends. They're outgoing. They actually plan things. They're fun. I didn't hesitate. Then you should date one of them. That stopped him completely. You don't mean that. I do. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just clear. He looked at me like he was trying to find the crack, the place where I'd soften, where I'd take it back, where I'd shift into negotiation. I didn't. So he tried something else. So where am I supposed to go right now? Chet, that's not my responsibility. His eyes narrowed. You're being cold. I'm being consistent. He glanced around that apartment again, like he expected something to change if he just waited long enough. It didn't. After about 30 seconds, he grabbed his suitcase. This isn't over, he said. For me, it is. He stood there for a second longer, then turned and walked out. The door closed behind him with a quiet click. And just like that, the apartment was silent again. Not tense. Not heavy. Just still. I didn't block him immediately. That's something people do when they're emotional. I wasn't. I was finished. About 20 minutes later, my phone started lighting up. First texts. Are you seriously doing this? You're embarrassing yourself. My friends were right about you. That last one made me pause for half a second. Then came the calls. I let them ring. Then voice messages. The first one, angry. He called me dramatic, insecure, small. The second one shifted. Softer, defensive. I didn't mean it like that. You know how they are. You're taking it wrong. By the third voicemail, his tone changed again. Not softer, smarter. You're going to regret this. You think you can just replace me? That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about us. It was about position, perception, status. I sent one final message. There's nothing to regret. Your belongings are secure. Let me know when you want the storage key. Then I muted the conversation. An hour later, my phone rang again. Unknown number, I answered. It was Kayla. Of course it was. Oh, you're really going to throw Victor out over a comment? She said, her tone already loaded with judgment. I kept my neutral. He wasn't thrown out. He no longer lives in my apartment. Oh my God, she scoffed. You're being so literal. It was a joke. We tease each other all the time. You don't date me, I said. He does. Silence. Then she tried again. He's upset. He feels blindsided. I considered that for a moment. He had 4 days to reflect on what he said, I replied. He chose rooftop bars instead. She exhaled sharply. You're proving his point right now. If his point is that I won't tolerate being disrespected, I said calmly, then yes. There was nothing else to say after that. We hung up, and for the first time since this started, there was no argument left to have. Around 9 p.m., my phone lit up again. Victor, where am I supposed to stay tonight? I read the message. Let it sit for a moment, then placed my phone face down on the table. That wasn't my problem anymore. The next morning, I went back to work like nothing had happened. That's the part people don't expect. They think there's supposed to be some kind of emotional aftermath, a spiral, a distraction, something visible. There wasn't. I had meetings. I handled tickets. I fixed a server issue that had been lingering for 2 days. Life didn't pause just because something ended. Around 10 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Victor, can we just talk like adults? I waited until my lunch break to respond. We already did. He called immediately. I stepped outside to take it. His voice was different this time. Calm, measured, careful. I didn't think you'd actually end things over that, he said. But that's the problem. A pause. What is? You didn't think I would. Silence. Then he shifted. I was venting. My friends exaggerate. I exaggerate back. It's not that deep. It is that deep, I said. You don't accidentally agree that your girlfriend is a joke. You're twisting it. I'm taking it at face value. Another pause. Then a different angle. You've been distant for months. You don't plan anything exciting. You don't post us. It feels like you're hiding me. I don't perform my relationship for your friends, I replied. That's not performing. That's being proud of who you're with. I am proud of who I am, I said. I don't need an audience. He exhaled, sharper this time. So that's it? You're just done? Yes. Just like that? Not just like that, I said. After consideration. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then, softer. We live together. We built something. That matters. I didn't interrupt him. We shared a life, Wendy. Space isn't the same as alignment, I said. That one landed. Silence stretched between us again. Then, quieter. You're really not going to fight for this? There's nothing to fight, I said. You said what you believe. I believe you. He didn't argue after that. Didn't apologize. Didn't try again. He just said, fine, and hung up. That was the moment I knew I'd made the right decision. Not because he was angry, but because he never once said he was wrong. Over the next few days, the story started changing. Not from me, from him. People started reaching out. Not my close friends. People from his circle. People who had only ever seen the curated version of our relationship. And hey, heard things ended kind of abruptly. Victor's pretty shaken up. He said you kicked him out while he was out of town. That word again. Kicked out. I didn't respond to most of them. The few I did, I kept it simple. It was my apartment. We broke up. His belongings are secure. No emotion. No defense. Just facts. Thursday afternoon, he posted something on Instagram. Nothing direct. Just a vague line. Some people can't handle strong men. Know your worth. The comments filled quickly. Fire emojis. Applause. Validation from people who only knew half a story and didn't care about the rest. I watched it. Didn't react. Around 8 p.m., he messaged me again. I can't believe you're making me look crazy to everyone. That almost made me smile. I hadn't posted anything. Hadn't said anything. Hadn't explained anything. I went to work. Went to the gym. Cooked dinner. That was it. You made your own story, I replied. So now I'm the villain? I didn't answer that. Instead, I asked, when do you want to pick up your storage key? He sent back a long paragraph. Angry. Accusatory. You're acting like a robot. You never even loved me. I typed a response. Deleted it. Then realized something. There was no reason for my phone to keep lighting up over someone who had already told me exactly how he saw me. So I did what I should have done 3 days earlier. I blocked him. His number, Instagram, WhatsApp, shared albums, everything. Not dramatic. Not symbolic. Just complete. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was final. I didn't hear from him for 5 days. Not directly. But silence doesn't always mean absence. It just means the pressure becomes indirect. Saturday afternoon, I was at the grocery store when I saw one of his friends. Not by accident. This wasn't near his usual area. She saw me first. Wow, she said, looking me up and down. You look fine. I am fine. She tilted her head. Victor said you completely shut down. Blocked him everywhere. That's kind of extreme. It's efficient. She crossed her arms. You know he's been staying with Kayla, right? He had nowhere else to go. That wasn't true. He had options. He just didn't expect to need them. We're not together, I said. He's an adult. He'll figure it out. She sighed, dramatic. You could have talked this through before blowing everything up. We did talk it through. She looked unconvinced. Over one comment? Over one truth. That ended the conversation. When I got home, I realized something. As long as I was reachable through other people, it wasn't actually over. So I removed that too. Archived every shared photo. No announcements. No captions. No explanations. Then I sent one message to the only mutual friend I respected. If Victor needs anything regarding the storage unit, he can email me. Otherwise, I'm not available. That was it. No more access. No more triangulation. No more noise. That weekend, I went for a run, cooked dinner, watched something without commentary in the background. And for the first time, I noticed the difference between being alone and being at peace. 2 weeks later, I got the email. Subject line storage. No emotion. No accusation. Just logistics. He wanted the unit number, the gate code, a time to collect his things. That told me everything. The storm was over. I replied with the details. Offered a time window. Wednesday, 6 p.m. We met in front of the storage facility. Neutral ground. Public. Clean. He looked different. Less polished. Less certain. You really went through with it, he said as I handed him the key. Yes. He studied me for a moment. Most people would have begged. I shrugged. Then you dated the wrong type. That almost made him smile. But it didn't last. You know, he said, I didn't actually think you were a joke. I looked at him. I think you did, I said. Or you were comfortable letting other people think that. That's not the same. It is. He didn't argue. We walked into the unit. All his boxes were there, stacked neatly, labeled, untouched. You packed all this yourself? Yes, he nodded slowly. I didn't think you had it in you. That word again. I locked the unit after he stepped inside, then handed him the key. Take care of yourself. No hug, no hesitation, no second look. I got in my car and drove home. My apartment, it wasn't bigger. It wasn't better, but it was mine, and it was quiet. People think strength looks loud, like shouting, like dramatic exits. Most of the time, it looks like this: a decision made once and never revisited. My name is Ophelia Graves. I'm 39 years old, and the moment my relationship ended didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came over dinner, in a tone so casual it almost felt rehearsed. I work as a commercial insurance adjuster. Most of my days are spent walking through other people's damage: fires, floods, things that collapse without warning. I document what's broken, estimate what it costs, and move on. There's a rhythm to it. Problems have causes. Outcomes follow decisions. At home, I built my life the same way: structured, predictable, stable. Ethan Cole is 37. He works in marketing, the kind of environment where confidence matters more than consistency. We've been together for almost 12 years, living together for 9. From the outside, everything looked fine. We had a house in a quiet neighborhood, bills paid on time, routines that didn't require discussion. I handled long-term planning, finances, maintenance, anything that needed foresight. Ethan handled the social side: gatherings, conversations, the parts of life that involved other people. It worked. At least that's what I told myself. Ethan has always had a certain way of speaking. Direct if you're being generous. Dismissive if you're being honest. Over time, I learned to let small comments pass. The tone, the subtle corrections, the way he'd frame things like he was always just slightly more reasonable than everyone else. None of it felt big enough to fight. What I didn't realize was that the real problem had already re-entered his life quietly. About 4 months ago, he mentioned that his ex-girlfriend, Natalie, had reached out to him. He said she had gone through a bad breakup, that she wasn't doing well mentally. He framed it simply: she just needed someone to talk to. At the time, I didn't question it. People reconnect. It happens. Looking back, that was the moment the door opened. The actual damage came later. It was a Sunday evening. Dinner was almost finished. Emily was scrolling through her phone, half paying attention like most teenagers do. I was talking about a property inspection scheduled for the next morning. Ethan waited for a pause. Then he said it. I've been thinking. I might stay with Natalie for a while, just to help her get back on her feet. I remember blinking once, slowly, like my brain needed a second to catch up with what I had just heard. Stay with her? I asked. He nodded, completely calm. 30 days. She's not in a good place. She needs stability. 30 days. Not visits, not checking in. A cell, living there. I stared at him for a few seconds, genuinely wondering if I had misunderstood the sentence. Why would you need to move in with your ex-girlfriend to help her? I asked. Ethan let out a quiet breath, already sounding tired of the question. It's not about that, Ophelia. It's about being a decent person. There it was. That shift. From explanation to implication. I kept my voice level. Decent people don't move in with their ex when they're in a relationship. He leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing just enough to signal irritation. That's a pretty small way to look at it. And just like that, the conversation stopped being strange and started becoming something else. Something sharper? I asked another question. What exactly would you be doing there for 30 days that you couldn't do during normal visits? Ethan shook his head like I was missing something obvious. She needs consistency. Someone there, not just dropping by like it's a checklist. The word sounded practiced, polished, like something he had already justified to himself. I watched him carefully. Did she ask you to move in? I asked. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. It was more my idea, he said. I understand her better than most people. That was the moment everything clicked into place. This wasn't a discussion. It was a decision. I'm not agreeing to that, I said calmly. Ethan let out a short laugh. Not surprised, not even defensive, just dismissive. You're turning this into something it's not. I'm responding to exactly what it is. He shook his head again, this time with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. This is what insecurity looks like, Ophelia. And before I could respond, Emily spoke. I think it's kind of nice, she said, still looking at her phone. She probably just needs help. I turned my head slightly toward her. That I hadn't expected. Not because she said it, but because of how easily she did. Like the conclusion had already been decided somewhere I wasn't part of. In less than 2 minutes, I went from confused to completely alone in my own house. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Let me be clear, I said, looking directly at Ethan. If you leave this house to go live with her for 30 days, this relationship is over. Silence. Then Ethan laughed again. This time louder. You're not serious. I am. He leaned forward slightly, studying me like I had just made a bad joke. You'd end everything over this? I wouldn't, I said quietly. You would. That landed. Not enough to stop him, but enough to irritate him. Emily spoke again. I think you're overreacting. Ethan nodded, like that confirmed something. Then he stood up. I'm not asking for permission, he said. I'm telling you what I'm doing. That sentence settled into the room like something final. I looked at him for a few seconds, and in that moment, I understood exactly where I stood. So I said the only thing left to say. If you walk out that door for this, don't come back expecting anything to still be here. He didn't answer. He just turned and walked upstairs. 20 minutes later, he came back down with a suitcase. Emily followed behind him, with a bag of her own. That part, I hadn't prepared for. She's coming with me, Ethan said. It's closer to her friends anyway, just temporary. Emily avoided looking at me. I'll be fine, she said. I nodded once. Not because I agreed, because I understood. They had already made their choice. Ethan grabbed his keys, paused near the door, and looked at me one last time. You'll realize you're overthinking this, he said. I didn't respond. I just watched. Then they left. The door closed, and the house went quiet in a way I had never heard before. I sat there for 10 minutes, maybe more. Then I stood up, walked into my office, opened my laptop, and started looking for a divorce attorney. The next morning, I didn't give myself time to sit in what had happened. That's the thing about my job. When something breaks, you don't stand there staring at it, hoping it will rearrange itself into something functional. You assess, you document, you act. I called a divorce attorney before I even left for work. Her name was Karen. She had been practicing family law for over 20 years, and her voice carried that steady, measured tone of someone who had seen every variation of a relationship falling apart. I explained the situation without embellishment. My boyfriend left our shared home to live with his ex-girlfriend for 30 days. He took my daughter with him. There was a brief pause on the line. Not shock, not confusion, just a moment of quiet calculation. Then Karen said something that cut through everything cleanly. From a legal standpoint, his decision to voluntarily leave and establish residence with another woman could work against him, depending on how things develop. I leaned back slightly in my chair, absorbing that, not because I needed validation, but because it confirmed something I already knew. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't misinterpreting. I had drawn a line exactly where it needed to be. Karen advised me to document everything. Dates, messages, conversations. She told me not to wait. Waiting only makes things more complicated, she said. Clarity early on gives you more control. Control. That word mattered. Because while Ethan believed he had control over the situation, what he didn't realize was that he had already stepped outside of it. By the time I hung up the call, the next steps were already clear. That afternoon, I officially started the process. Paperwork, documentation, timelines. Everything moved forward the way it always does when something is handled properly. Structured, efficient, final. While all of that was happening, Ethan sent me exactly 2 messages. The first one came late that morning. We got here. Everything's fine. Emily's settling in. No acknowledgement of the conversation the night before. No mention of the line I had drawn. Just information. Neutral. Detached. The second message came a few hours later. I think you'll feel differently once you calm down. We should talk later. I read it once. Then again. Not because I was reconsidering anything, but because I was noticing what wasn't there. No apology. No hesitation. No recognition that anything significant had happened. Just the quiet assumption that I would eventually come around. That I always did. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded both messages to Karen and continued filling out the necessary documents. The strangest part of that day wasn't the decision. It was the silence. Ethan clearly believed I was bluffing. That this would pass. That I would soften like I had before. What he didn't understand was that once I reached a conclusion about something like this, I didn't revisit it. By the end of the week, the divorce paperwork was officially filed. Ethan still had no idea. 10 days later, he found out. Not from me. From being served. I was at work when my phone rang that afternoon. His name showed on the screen. I let it ring once before answering. I already knew what the conversation would be. He didn't say hello. Did you seriously file for divorce? His voice wasn't hurt. It was sharp, fast, controlled anger barely held in place. Yes, I said. There was a short pause. Then he started talking quickly, the way he always did when he thought he could steer a situation back in his favor. This is exactly what I expected from you. You turned something temporary into something extreme. Temporary? He repeated it again. 30 days, Ophelia, that's all it was. Like the number changed the reality. Like duration erased intent. I let him finish. Then I asked one question. Did you move in with her after I told you what it would mean? Silence. Not long, but long enough. Then he shifted. You're twisting this, he said. It's not like that. I didn't interrupt. She needed help. That's it. You're acting like I did something wrong. I kept my voice even. You left our home. You moved in with your ex-girlfriend. After I told you exactly what the consequence would be. Yeah, that's not the same thing and you know it, he snapped. But he didn't answer the question. Not directly. He couldn't, because the answer was simple. And it didn't work in his favor. He pivoted again, trying a different angle. Emily's fine, by the way. She actually understands the situation. That part almost made me smile. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. Still framing it like everything was reasonable. Still assuming I would engage with the argument. Instead, I said something he clearly wasn't expecting. The paperwork is already filed. My attorney will handle anything else. That landed differently. There was a shift on the line. For the first time, the certainty in his voice cracked. You're seriously doing this? There's nothing to discuss, I said. This is a misunderstanding, he pushed. No, I replied quietly. It isn't. He started to say something else. I didn't wait to hear it. I ended the call, and just like that, the conversation was over. Clean, final, without emotion. What Ethan didn't realize at that moment was that things on his end were already starting to fall apart. About 2 weeks after he left, the first crack appeared. And it didn't come from him. It came from Emily. She called me one evening. That alone was unusual. Since she left, our communication had been minimal. A few short messages, one-word replies. Distance, not physical, emotional. So when I saw her name on my phone, I answered immediately. Hey, I said. There was a pause on her end. Then she spoke. Her voice wasn't upset. It was irritated. This isn't what I thought it would be, she said. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. The apartment's small, she continued. Like, really small. It's just one bedroom. I pictured it immediately. Where are you sleeping? I asked. On the couch, she said. He took the bedroom. He, not Dad, not Ethan, just him. That told me more than the words did. That's temporary, right? I asked. Yeah, she said quickly. I think so. There was hesitation there, a small crack. Then she added something else. And Natalie's not how he described. That got my attention. How do you mean? I asked. Emily exhaled. She's not really struggling like that. She just kind of sits around, plays games, complains a lot. I stayed quiet. Let her keep going. And he's doing everything, she said. Cooking, cleaning, running errands, like all of it. There it was. The shift. Not dramatic, but clear. What does she do? I asked. Emily paused. Oh, not much. Another crack. She doesn't even seem that grateful, she added. That one mattered. Because gratitude would have justified the sacrifice. The absence of it exposed something else. Emily continued, her tone tightening slightly. I told him that, and they argued about it. I leaned back in my chair, already seeing the shape of what was forming. 3 people, 1 small apartment, 1 situation built on assumptions. Does it feel normal? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then she said something simple. And no. That was the moment everything started to shift. Not for me, for her. I thought she needed help, Emily said quietly. I know, I replied. There was a pause. Then she asked something that lingered even after the call ended. Do you think it's going to get better? I looked out the window for a second. At nothing in particular. Then I answered honestly. I don't know. But in my mind, the answer was already clear. This wasn't going to stabilize. It was going to unravel. Because what Ethan had walked into wasn't what he thought it was. And from the sound of it, he was starting to realize that too. 3 days after that first call, Emily called me again. This time there was no hesitation in her voice. No attempt to soften anything. She sounded done pretending. They're arguing, she said immediately. Like every day. I didn't ask who. I already knew. I leaned back in my chair, phone pressed lightly to my ear, letting her talk. At first it was just small stuff, she continued. But now it's everything. There was a shift in her tone. Not irritation anymore. Clarity. The first week, he was acting like she needed him all the time, she said. Like long conversations, checking on her, asking if she was okay every hour. That part matched what Ethan had described, what he had justified. But that didn't last, she added. Of course it didn't. What changed? I asked. Emily let out a quiet breath. He stopped asking, and she stopped pretending. That sentence settled into place slowly, carefully. She doesn't act like someone who needs help, Emily said. She acts like someone who's used to being taken care of. There it was. Not fragile. Not broken. Just comfortable. Comfortable enough to let someone else carry everything. And he's doing everything, Emily repeated. Cooking, cleaning, grocery runs, all of it. I closed my eyes for a second. Not because I was surprised. Because I wasn't. And she? I asked. Emily didn't hesitate this time. She complains, she said flatly, about her ex, about her life, about how things aren't fair, but she doesn't actually do anything. That imbalance was already turning into something else, something heavier. They argued about it yesterday, Emily continued. He told her she could at least try to help out more. And, I asked. She said he didn't understand what she was going through, Emily replied. That emotional support isn't the same as physical effort. I almost smiled at that, not because it was amusing, because it was predictable. Rationalization always sounds convincing when you don't have to carry the weight of it. And how did he take that? I asked. Emily paused. Not well. There was another shift. Subtle, but important. He's starting to get annoyed, she said. Like, actually annoyed. Good. Not for me. For reality. Because annoyance meant expectation. And expectation meant disappointment, which meant the illusion was cracking. They barely leave the apartment, Emily added. He thought they'd be talking through things, helping her figure stuff out. But most of the time she's just on her phone or playing games. I let that sit. Then Emily said something that changed the direction of everything. He told her about the divorce. I straightened slightly. What exactly did he say? I asked. That things at home got complicated, Emily said. That you overreacted and filed. Of course. Still framing it that way. Still avoiding responsibility. And how did she respond? I asked. Emily hesitated. Not because she didn't want to say it. Because she was choosing how. She got irritated, she said finally. That didn't surprise me. But what came next did. She said she didn't sign up for that. I went still. Repeat that, I said quietly. She said she didn't sign up for relationship drama, Emily repeated. Like, she thought he'd just help her out, not bring problems into her life. There it was. Clear, unfiltered. The reality Ethan hadn't considered. He didn't walk into her life as a solution. He walked in as a complication. What did he say? I asked. Emily exhaled. He tried to explain, said it wasn't supposed to turn into that. But it did, I said. Yeah. Silence stretched between us for a moment. Then Emily added something else. She also said she didn't expect him to actually move in. That part mattered, more than anything else. What do you mean? I asked. She thought he'd visit, Emily said. Not stay, not bring me, not make it permanent. Permanent. That word hung there, even though everything had been framed as temporary. So this wasn't her idea? I asked. Emily hesitated. I don't think so, she said. Not like this. That confirmed it. The entire situation, the move, the living arrangement, the disruption, had been driven by Ethan's interpretation, his assumption, his decision, and now he was sitting in the middle of it, with someone who never actually wanted what he offered. They argued about that too, Emily added, about whose idea this even was. I nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see it. Of course they did. Because when reality starts to settle in, people look for somewhere to place the blame. And there wasn't a version of this where either of them came out looking reasonable. What's it like there now? I asked. Emily didn't answer right away. Then she said one word. Awkward. I almost asked her to explain. But I didn't need to. I could picture it. The small apartment. The tension. The unspoken frustration building in the air. 3 people. None of them aligned. All the doors are closed now, she added quietly. That part caught my attention. What do you mean? She stays in the bedroom more, Emily said. He's in the living room. They don't really talk unless it turns into an argument. Distance. Inside the same space. That's always when things are closest to breaking. And you? I asked. I just stay out of it, she said. I don't even want to be there when they start. There was something else in her voice now. Not just discomfort. Fatigue. Emotional exhaustion. She had gone from supporting the idea to witnessing it collapse in less than 2 weeks. They argued again this morning, she added. About money this time. That tracked. It always does. What happened? I asked. She asked him to pick up groceries, Emily said. He said he already paid for everything last time. Then she said he was being selfish. I let out a slow breath. Of course. Because once the emotional narrative breaks, what's left is the reality of contribution. And reality is never evenly distributed when expectations aren't aligned. He told her he wasn't her caretaker, Emily said. And what did she say? I asked. Emily paused. Then she said it. She told him. He offered. That one landed. Because she wasn't wrong. He did. Freely. Confidently. Without understanding what it actually meant. And now he was learning. The hard way. I don't think this is going to last, Emily said quietly. I didn't respond right away. Not because I disagreed. Because there was nothing left to add. The situation wasn't stabilizing. It was accelerating towards something neither of them had prepared for. And from where I was sitting, it wasn't difficult to see how it would end. Not with resolution, not with understanding, but with something much simpler. Collapse. About a week later, Emily called me again. This time she didn't sound irritated. She didn't sound frustrated. She sounded tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from lack of sleep. The kind that settles deeper than that. They had a big fight, she said. I didn't ask who. I already knew. When, I asked. This morning, she replied. Like, actually yelling, not just arguing. I leaned back slightly, letting her continue. It started because he brought up staying longer, she said. That caught my attention. Staying longer? I repeated. Yeah, Emily said. He said things were still unstable and that maybe extending the time would help figure everything out. I didn't say anything, because I understood exactly what that meant. He had started realizing something. Coming back wasn't simple anymore. Not after what he had done, not after what I had already put in motion. So instead of facing that, he tried to delay it. And how did she react? I asked. Emily let out a quiet breath. Badly. I almost nodded. Of course she did. She told him the plan was 30 days, Emily continued. That's it. No extensions. There it was. The boundary he had ignored, now being enforced on him. He tried to explain, Emily said. Said things had gotten complicated, that he needed more time. I stared out the window again. That word. Complicated. It always shows up when people don't want to take responsibility for something simple. And? I asked. She said she didn't agree to any of that, Emily replied. That helping him for a few weeks was one thing. But dealing with everything else wasn't her problem. Everything else. Meaning me. Meaning the relationship he had already broken. Meaning the consequences he didn't think would follow him. That's when it got worse, Emily added. How? I asked. They started arguing about whose idea this even was, she said. He said he came there because she needed him. She said she never asked him to move in. I closed my eyes for a brief second. There it was. The truth. Not dramatic. Not complicated. Just exposed. He told her he thought they were reconnecting, Emily said. That part didn't surprise me. It explained everything. The confidence. The certainty. The way he dismissed my boundary like it didn't matter. He thought he was stepping into something. Not away from it. And what did she say? I asked. Emily hesitated. Then she said it. She told him he completely misunderstood. I let that settle. Slowly. Carefully. Because that sentence, that one sentence, reframed everything. Not just what was happening there, but what had already happened here. He asked her if she was serious, Emily continued. And she said yes. There was a pause. Then Emily added one more thing. She said she never planned to get back together. That was it. The final piece. The thing he had built the entire situation around didn't exist. And suddenly, everything made sense. Why she wasn't grateful. Why she was irritated. Why the apartment felt wrong from the beginning. Because from her perspective, this wasn't a reunion. It was an inconvenience. They didn't talk after that, Emily said quietly. I'm not surprised, I replied. There was nothing left to say. Not on their end. Not on mine. A few days passed after that. Then Emily called again. This time her voice was different. Lighter. But not in a happy way. In a resolved way. Can I come home? She asked. There was no hesitation. Yes, I said. That was it. No conditions. No lectures. Just yes. She came back that evening with 2 bags. She looked older than she had 3 weeks ago. Not physically. Emotionally. Like something had shifted into place that couldn't be undone. I didn't ask her for details. I didn't need to. She had already lived through them. She barely talks to him now, Emily said later that night, sitting across from me. And he's barely there anyway. What do you mean? I asked. He goes out more, she said. Or stays in the bedroom. She's the one in the living room now. I nodded slowly. The roles had reversed. Not evenly, but enough. And her? I asked. Emily shrugged slightly. She looks stressed, she said. Like she didn't think it would turn out like this. Of course she didn't, because she assumed something, the same way he did. That everything would adjust around their decision. That consequences were flexible. That people were. They barely speak, Emily added, and when they do, it turns into an argument. I leaned back in my chair, letting that settle, because by that point, there was nothing left to unfold. The outcome had already arrived. Ethan tried calling me that night. I didn't answer. The next day, he sent a message. We need to talk. Things got complicated. I read it once, then set my phone down. Complicated. From his perspective, maybe. From mine, it had never been clearer. He made a decision. I responded to it, exactly the way I said I would. A few days later, Emily told me he had left the apartment. Not dramatically. Not with some final conversation. Just left. The 30 days had ended, and there was nothing left holding him there. No relationship. No purpose. No place to stay that meant anything. And the one place he had assumed would still be there was already gone. Legally. Emotionally. Completely. He called again after that. More than once. I didn't answer, because there was nothing left to say. The situation didn't collapse because of confusion, or miscommunication, or misunderstanding. It collapsed because of a single decision that he believed I would eventually accept. I didn't. And that was the only part of this story that never changed. My name is Wendy Collins. I'm 34. And the moment my relationship ended, didn't sound like heartbreak. It sounded like something clicking into place, like a detail finally aligning after weeks of not quite making sense. I work as a procurement analyst for a hospital network in Charlotte. My days are structured. Contracts, vendors, numbers that either add up or they don't. I like things that make sense. I like systems that behave the way they're supposed to. People are harder. Brandon Hale is 31. Event marketing. Fast-paced, image-driven, always surrounded by people who seemed just slightly louder than necessary. When we met, that difference felt balanced. He brought energy, I brought stability. At least, that's what I told myself. We had been together just under 4 years, living together for a little over 1, talking about the future in a way that sounded real enough that I stopped questioning it. We were already paying deposits for things, nothing extravagant, just enough to make everything feel official. A venue, a photographer, small, expensive decisions that quietly anchor you to a timeline. I was covering more than half of it, not because we agreed to it in any formal way, just because it kept happening. Brandon always had a reason. A client dinner he had to front, a last-minute outfit for an event, a weekend trip that was somehow good for networking. It was always temporary, always justified. And I let it be, because I believed we were building something shared. But looking back now, there was a pattern I ignored longer than I should have. Anything that benefited Brandon directly was urgent. Anything that required mutual responsibility was negotiable. Rent discussions took effort. Grocery splits became conversations. Wedding payments were delayed, revisited, adjusted. But if Brandon wanted something, new luggage, upgraded skincare, a weekend away, it wasn't a discussion. It was an expectation. And slowly, without saying it out loud, I adjusted to that. About 2 months before everything ended, something shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way you could point to and say there. It was quieter. Brandon became careful with his phone. Not subtle about it either. Smiling at the screen, then angling it away. Taking calls on the balcony. Sleeping with it tucked under his pillow like it contained something fragile. The first time I asked, he didn't hesitate. Not everything in my life is your business, Wendy. The speed of that response stayed with me longer than the words themselves, because it wasn't defensive. It was prepared. After that, I stopped asking. But I started noticing. He went out more, explained less, became just slightly harder to reach in ways that didn't quite have a reason. Then came the Miami trip. He talked about it constantly. Flights, beach clubs, matching outfits with his friends. Hotel upgrades that sounded expensive. More expensive than the wedding payments he kept postponing. I didn't say much at first. There's a point where asking questions stops giving you answers and just creates arguments. But then one morning, everything shifted. I was in the kitchen making coffee before work. Brandon had left his phone on the counter when he went to shower. I wasn't looking at it. The screen lit up on its own, and the message preview was just there. Last night was worth the risk. There was a name attached to it I didn't recognize. I stared at it longer than I should have. Long enough for the wording to settle in. Long enough for my brain to stop trying to explain it away. Because there are messages that feel neutral, and there are messages that don't. I didn't touch the phone. Didn't unlock it. I just stood there, replaying the last 2 months in my head. The secrecy, the distance, the way simple questions suddenly felt like accusations. When Brandon walked back into the kitchen, wrapped in a towel, scrolling through his phone like nothing existed outside of it, I watched his face. That's when it became real. Because when he saw the message, he froze. Not confused. Not curious. Just alert. He glanced at me, locked the screen, turned the phone face down. Like instinct. Like practice. I asked who had texted him. He answered too quickly. A coworker. Event schedule stuff. The explanation came before the question. That's always a sign. I nodded. Didn't push. Because there's no point arguing with someone who's already decided you're wrong. But the message stayed with me all day. And that night, the last piece fell into place. Around 10 p.m., I was sitting on the couch when one of Brandon's friends posted an Instagram story. I wasn't looking for anything. It just appeared. A crowded house party, loud music, too many people in a space that wasn't built for it. And then I saw him, standing near the kitchen, laughing, relaxed. There was a woman next to him. Her arm wasn't just brushing against him. It was resting around his waist like it belonged there. And Brandon leaned into it. Not casually, comfortably. The kind of comfort that doesn't happen in a moment. He said something into her ear. She smiled. And for a second, I realized something that felt strangely calm. I hadn't seen that expression directed at me in a while. The video ended after 10 seconds. I watched it twice. Not because I needed confirmation, but because part of me still wanted to be wrong. Eventually, that part went quiet. Because there's a moment where your mind stops negotiating with reality and just accepts it. I didn't call him, didn't text. I just sat there, waiting. And for the first time in weeks, everything made sense. Brandon came home a little after 1 a.m. He opened the door quietly, like he was trying not to wake me. The problem was, I wasn't asleep. I was still sitting on the couch, lights on, TV muted, waiting in a way that didn't feel emotional anymore, just deliberate. The second he saw me, he paused. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. But I did, because I had spent the entire day noticing things. "Why are you still up?" he asked, like that was the part of the situation that needed explaining. His voice was casual, slightly annoyed, like I had disrupted something routine. I looked at him for a second before answering. I saw the video. That was it. No build-up, no accusation, just the truth placed between us. He froze. Not dramatically, just enough. Just long enough for me to see the calculations start. "What video?" he asked, already defensive. I didn't move, didn't raise my voice. "Your friend's Instagram story, the party." His expression tightened, then immediately shifted into something familiar. Dismissal. He rolled his eyes and dropped his keys on the counter a little harder than necessary. "You're stalking my friends now?" That was his first move. Not confusion, not explanation. Deflection. I shook my head slightly. "It showed up on my feed. I recognized you." Then I added, calmly, "And the woman with her arm around your waist." That was when the tone changed. He exhaled sharply, like I was exhausting him. "It was a crowded party, Wendy. People stand close. That doesn't mean anything." I watched him as he said it. The ease, the rehearsed rhythm, and something inside me didn't react, because I already knew. So instead of arguing, I just kept going. "I saw a message this morning," I said. That got his attention. His eyes flicked toward me, sharper this time. "What message?" "The one that said a last night was worth the risk." Silence. Not long, but long enough. I continued before he could interrupt. "You left your phone on the counter. The screen lit up. I didn't touch it. I didn't go through anything." I paused. "But I saw your face when you read it." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. And for a moment, I saw it. Not guilt. Not exactly. Just pressure. Like he was deciding which version of the truth would cost him less. "You're making assumptions," he said finally. "You don't know what that message was about." I nodded. "You're right," I said quietly. "I don't know what it was about." Then I met his eyes. "But I know what it looked like." He scoffed. "That's the problem, Wendy. You always jump to conclusions instead of just trusting me." That word, trust. He said it like it belonged to him, like he hadn't been quietly dismantling it for weeks. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. I just laid everything out. The phone, the secrecy, the way you've been acting for the last 2 months, the message, the video. I gestured slightly toward him. "The way you're reacting right now." He tried to interrupt. "Because you're accusing me of—" I didn't stop him loudly. I just kept speaking. And somehow that was enough to cut through him. "I'm not interested in debating details," I said. "I'm looking at the pattern." That landed. Because patterns are harder to argue with. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then I took a breath and said the part that had already settled in my mind hours ago. "I'm not going to marry someone who behaves like this." The words didn't feel dramatic. They felt accurate. Brandon blinked at me, like he was waiting for something else. For the argument to continue, for me to get emotional, for this to turn into something he could manage. But it didn't. "Start packing your things," I added. That's when he laughed. Not nervously, not uncertainly, dismissively. Like I had just said something ridiculous. "You're not serious." I didn't respond, because I was. And he could tell. It took a few seconds, but I watched the realization settle in, slowly, uncomfortably. "You're ending this?" he asked. "Over a misunderstanding?" "It stopped being a misunderstanding when you started lying," I said. That changed his expression immediately. He crossed his arms, posture tightening. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Am I? Yes, he snapped. Nothing happened. She's just someone I met. We were talking. That's it. I tilted my head slightly. Then why did it feel like something worth hiding? He hesitated, just for a second, then pushed forward. Even if something did happen, he said, frustration bleeding into his voice, that doesn't mean you get to throw me out of the apartment. There it was. Not denial. Not apology. Just negotiation. Like loyalty was optional. But my reaction was the real issue. I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I said very clearly, this apartment is in my name. I gestured around us. The lease, the rent, the utilities. I met his eyes again. You moved in because we were planning a future together. A small pause. That plan just changed. Something in his face shifted then, because he realized I wasn't going to argue in circles. I wasn't going to chase explanations. I had already moved past that. He tried a different angle. Couples work through things like this all the time. I didn't respond. You're sabotaging everything, he continued, because you can't handle a little uncertainty. I let him talk for about 30 seconds. Then I cut in, calm and steady. It's over. That was it. No escalation. No emotion. Just final. And that's when he finally understood. Really understood. Because the confidence drained out of him almost instantly. First came guilt. Wendy, come on. 4 years? Then pressure. What about the wedding? The deposits? Our families? Then reputation. People are going to think you overreacted. I nodded slightly. That's fine. That answer didn't help him. He paced the living room, running a hand through his hair, trying to find something that would land. Eventually, he stopped, tried to reset. Maybe we should just sleep on this, he said. Talk tomorrow, like adults. There's nothing to sleep on. My voice didn't change. The decision is already made. That's when the anger showed up. So you're just kicking me out right now? It's barely past 1, I said. And you just came back from a party with someone you've been hiding. I held his gaze. Yes, you need to pack. He muttered something under his breath and walked into the bedroom. I followed a minute later, not to argue, just to make sure this stayed what it was. An ending. He started throwing clothes into a suitcase. Not folding, not organizing, just shoving. Each movement sharper than the last. And while he packed, he kept talking. Complaining. About how unfair I was being. About how I was overreacting. About how none of this justified what I was doing. I let him talk. Because none of it changed anything. Then, in the middle of all that, he said something that made me pause. What about Miami? I thought I misheard him. What? My trip, he said like it was obvious. Next month. I stared at him, waiting. Because surely that wasn't what he meant. We were already planning it, he continued. Flights, hotel, everything's booked. I didn't say anything, so he kept going. And you were helping cover part of it, he added, since it's basically a pre-wedding thing. There was a moment. A very specific kind of silence. The kind where your brain stops trying to interpret and just observes. We just ended our relationship, I said slowly. He sighed. Like I was the difficult one. That doesn't change the fact that the trip is already planned. I watched him. Really watched him. Trying to understand how someone could say that and mean it. And refusing to pay now, he added, is honestly kind of controlling. That word again. Controlling. Placed carefully. Like it was supposed to shift something. But it didn't. Because in that moment, everything about him made sense in a way it never had before. So I explained it, clearly, simply. There is no wedding anymore. I held his gaze. So there's no pre-wedding trip. A beat. And I'm not funding a vacation for someone who just betrayed me. His expression hardened immediately. That's petty. No, I said quietly. It's accurate. He shook his head frustrated. The trip has nothing to do with what happened tonight. It had everything to do with the wedding, I replied. That ended 15 minutes ago. That didn't land. Or maybe it did. And he just didn't like it. Instead, he pivoted. It's going to be embarrassing if I cancel, he said. Everyone already knows about it. I didn't respond, so he kept going. My friends are expecting me there. Still nothing. Then he said the part that explained everything. I've been telling Sam about it for weeks, he added. How I can still do what I want, even while being in a relationship. A small pause. Because you handle most of the financial stuff anyway. There it was. Not hidden. Not softened. Just stated. And for a second I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not even hurt. Just clarity. A clean, quiet understanding of what this had actually been. I nodded once. If you want to go celebrate your freedom in Miami, I said, you're welcome to. Then I picked up his suitcase and set it by the door. You're just not doing it with my money. He stared at me, furious, but with nothing left to argue. because for the first time, there wasn't anything unclear about where I stood. He grabbed his suitcase, muttered something about how his friends would understand, and walked out. The door closed behind him, and the apartment went quiet. Not empty, not lonely, just still. And for the first time in weeks, everything made sense. I didn't hear from Brandon for 2 days. No messages, no missed calls, no last-minute attempts to rewrite what had already happened. And honestly, I preferred it that way. The apartment felt different without him. Not empty, just quieter in a way that didn't require effort. I spent the weekend doing things that made sense. Practical things. I changed passwords on shared accounts, canceled the catering deposit, sent a short, neutral email to the venue explaining that the wedding wasn't happening anymore. No explanations, no emotional details. Just logistics. It felt strangely familiar, like work. A situation had changed, so I adjusted the system around it. By Sunday afternoon, I had almost settled into that rhythm. Then my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made me pause. Kayla, one of Brandon's friends. We weren't close, but we'd been around each other enough. Birthdays, group dinners, the kind of social overlap that builds quiet familiarity without real connection. Her message was short. Hey, is Brandon being serious about what he told us? I stared at it for a second. Something about the wording felt off. I replied. What did he say? There was a brief pause. Then 3 dots. Then a screenshot. It was from a group chat. Brandon's group chat. And judging by the names at the top, most of the people in that thread were the same ones he had been planning that Miami trip with. The message was long. A rant. But the tone was familiar. Confident. Defensive. Slightly performative. According to Brandon's version of events, I had thrown him out over nothing. He said I got insecure because he went to a party. That I couldn't handle him having a life outside the relationship. That I was now refusing to pay for the Miami trip just to punish him. I read it once. Then again, not because it was confusing, but because it was precise, carefully framed. Every detail angled just enough to make him look reasonable. And me, unstable. At the bottom of the screenshot, there was another message. Shorter, more casual. I've been telling you guys for weeks. I still do whatever I want. It's not like she was going to stop funding things now. I stopped there, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed something I had already felt without proof. This was how he talked about me when I wasn't there. Not as a partner, not as someone he respected. Just a resource. Kayla sent another message. He showed up here Friday night with his suitcase. I didn't respond right away, so she continued. He was really upset, like angry and embarrassed at the same time. A small pause. But not everyone is seeing it the way he expected. That got my attention. What do you mean? I asked. There was a longer pause this time. Then her reply came through. At first, people were on his side, she said, because of how he told it. That made sense. He was good at that. Framing things. Controlling the narrative just enough to avoid being questioned. But then someone asked what actually happened, she added. I leaned back slightly against the couch. Reading slower now. He tried to keep it vague. Said you overreacted. Said you were controlling. Another message. But then someone asked about the girl. There it was. The part he couldn't smooth over. Kayla continued. He said she was just someone he met at the party. Nothing serious. I could almost hear his tone. Casual, dismissive, minimizing. But, she added, a couple of people in the room had already seen him with her before. That didn't surprise me. Patterns rarely exist in isolation. And once that came up, she wrote, things started getting uncomfortable. I could picture it. The shift. Subtle at first, then harder to ignore. People started asking more direct questions, Kayla said. Like why he was talking to someone like that while he was still in a relationship. I exhaled slowly, not out of relief, just recognition. And then he brought up the Miami trip again. Of course he did. He kept saying you had already agreed to help pay for it, she continued. That backing out now was controlling. I closed my eyes briefly, just for a second, because even now, the logic was consistent, in his mind. But that didn't really land, Kayla added. There was a pause before her next message, like she was choosing how to phrase it. One of the girls asked something pretty simple. Another pause. If the relationship is over, why would she still be paying for anything? I opened my eyes again, staring at the screen, waiting. He didn't really have an answer, Kayla wrote. Of course he didn't. Because the answer wasn't logical. It was entitlement. And that's when everything started falling apart, she added. Her messages came a little faster now, like she was replaying it as she typed. He got defensive, then frustrated, then emotional. I could picture that too, the way he escalated when something stopped going his way. He kept repeating the same things, she said, that you were overreacting, that you were ruining everything. A small pause. But no one was really agreeing anymore. That part landed differently. Not because I needed validation, but because it confirmed something else. The version of reality he had been building only worked when no one questioned it. And then someone asked about the message, she added. My grip on the phone tightened slightly. Oh, what message? I typed. The one he sent her, Kayla replied. Another screenshot came through. Not from the group chat this time. From a private conversation someone had shown the room. It was short. Just one line. Last night was worth the risk. Same wording. Different context. And suddenly, there was no ambiguity left. He said it didn't mean anything, Kayla wrote. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. But at that point, she continued, no one really believed that anymore. I leaned back into the couch again. Phone still in my hand. Everything quiet around me. The mood changed after that, she said. People stopped comforting him. Another pause. They started questioning him. That was the shift. The one he didn't anticipate. The one he couldn't control. He got louder, she added. More defensive. I could hear it. See it. The unraveling. And then he started talking about the trip again. Of course, because that was the part he cared about. He said it was unfair, Kayla wrote, that you cut him off right before it. I shook my head slightly, not in disbelief. Just acknowledgement. And someone asked him something that kind of ended the conversation. I waited, reading slower now. What? Kayla's reply came a few seconds later. If you wanted that much freedom, a pause. Why were you expecting her to fund it? I stared at that line. Longer than I expected, because it wasn't complicated. It wasn't emotional. It was just clear. And apparently, in that room, clarity had finally shown up. Kayla didn't send anything for a minute after that. Just silence. Like even she wasn't sure how to summarize what came next. When her message finally came through, it was shorter. He didn't take that well. I didn't need details to understand what that meant, but she gave them anyway. He tried to argue, she wrote. Said it wasn't about money, that it was about fairness. I let out a quiet breath. Because that word again, fairness, only ever showed up when things stopped going his way. But no one really engaged with that, she continued. Another pause. Someone pointed out that fairness doesn't mean someone keeps giving after you've already taken more than you should have. That line stayed with me, not because it was new, but because it was finally being said out loud by someone else. Kayla's messages came slower after that, like she was choosing what mattered. He started getting emotional, she said. Not sad at first, just frustrated. I could picture it. The pacing, the raised voice, the way he would try to pull attention back toward himself. He kept saying you embarrassed him, she added, that you could have handled it privately. I tilted my head slightly, because that part almost sounded reasonable. Until you looked at it properly. Private would have meant continuing the same pattern. Quietly. Conveniently. For him. But then someone reminded him, she wrote, that he was the one who brought it into the room. Another pause. By showing up with a suitcase and a story. That was the moment. The one where the narrative stops being something you control and becomes something other people evaluate. And after that, Kayla continued, he just kind of lost it. I didn't interrupt. Didn't respond. I just read. He started raising his voice, saying it wasn't that serious, that you were overreacting, that you ruined everything over something small. I closed my eyes briefly, because I had heard those exact words, just framed differently. And then someone asked him what exactly was small about it, she added. That question didn't need an answer. And he didn't really have one. Of course he didn't. Because once you remove the framing, all that's left is the truth. He started pacing, she wrote, talking faster, repeating himself. I could see it clearly now. The unraveling. Not dramatic, just inevitable. And then the Miami trip came up again. That part almost felt predictable now. Like a loop he couldn't break out of. He said it was going to be embarrassing to cancel, Kayla wrote, that everyone already knew about it, that he'd been talking about it for weeks. I remembered that, the way he described it, the excitement, the entitlement hidden just beneath it. And someone asked if that was the real problem, she added. A pause. Or if the real problem was that he couldn't afford it anymore. That landed harder than anything else. Because it wasn't emotional, it was factual. And that's when he actually broke, she said. I stared at the screen, waiting. He started yelling, Kayla continued. Then he got quiet. Then he started crying. Not quiet tears. Not controlled. Just collapse. He kept saying it wasn't fair, she added again. That everything got taken away all at once. I let that sit for a moment. Because from his perspective, maybe it did feel that way. The relationship, the stability, the financial support, all gone at once. But that wasn't what actually happened. What happened was that everything he had been relying on finally stopped being available. He said you ruined his plans, she wrote. I shook my head slightly, not in disagreement, just correction, because I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped participating. And by the end of the night, Kayla added, no one really knew what to say to him anymore. That part felt accurate, because there's a point where explanation runs out, and all that's left is consequence. He ended up just sitting there, she said, not talking. Another pause. And the trip kind of stopped being a topic. Of course it did. Because without the structure supporting it, it didn't exist anymore. Kayla's final message came a minute later. He spent weeks talking about how independent he was. A small pause. I think this was the first time he actually had to be. I stared at that line, longer than anything else, because it didn't feel like commentary. It felt like conclusion. I typed back a simple response. Thanks for telling me. She replied with a short, of course. And that was it. No follow-up. No extra questions. Just done. I set my phone down on the table. The apartment was quiet again. But this time it felt different. Not just still. Resolved. I looked around the space. Same furniture. Same walls. Same life. Technically. But something fundamental had shifted. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just cleanly. Because the confusion was gone. The second guessing. The constant effort to make something make sense when it didn't. All of it. Gone. And in its place, there was something simpler. Someone who cheats on you, while expecting you to keep funding their life, isn't confused. They're not misunderstood. They're not complicated. They're just clear. And once you see that clearly, there's nothing left to debate. Walking away didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a correction. A precise one. The kind I deal with every day at work. Something doesn't add up. So you fix it. You don't argue with the numbers. You adjust the system. And move on. I leaned back slightly, letting the silence settle around me. Not heavy, not empty. Just steady. And for the first time in a long time, everything balanced again. My name is Daphne Sterling. I'm 34 years old. And the moment my engagement ended, didn't sound like heartbreak. It sounded like clarity. Cold, precise, almost rehearsed. I'm meeting my ex for dinner. It's just for closure. Don't get jealous. Julian didn't call. He didn't ask. He informed. And that was the part that stayed with me. Not the dinner, not even the ex, but the instruction. Don't get jealous. Like my reaction had already been decided, managed in advance, filed away as something irrational before I even had the chance to feel it. I was still at my desk when the message came in. 1840. I remember the exact time because I had just finished reviewing a set of drainage schematics for a flood control project. My days are structured like that. Clear inputs, measurable outputs, predictable timelines. I work as a civil engineer for the municipality here in Rotterdam. Infrastructure, bridges, water systems, long cycles, minimal surprises. I built my life that way on purpose. Stability is not something I stumbled into. It's something I constructed. I live alone in a small apartment near the river. I bought it 2 years before Julian and I got engaged. I am careful with money, careful with commitments, careful with anything that has long-term consequences. Because I grew up watching what happens when people aren't. Julian Carter is 31. He works in marketing for a mid-sized fashion brand. Fast-paced, social, reactive. He says what he thinks when he thinks it. That confidence was attractive at first. It felt like balance. I brought structure. He brought energy. At least that's what I told myself. We've been together for 3 years, engaged for 8 months. The wedding was scheduled for September, less than 4 months away. Deposits paid, invitations sent, families involved. We didn't live together yet. That was my decision. I prefer clear transitions, defined steps. But we shared a joint credit card. Wedding expenses only. Venue, catering, photographer. It was under my name. He was an authorized user. Transparency matters to me. Control, too. I read his message twice. Then a third time. What stood out wasn't the dinner itself. It was the timing. And the framing. There was no conversation earlier in the day. No context. No, hey, can we talk about something? Just a decision already made, presented as something I was expected to accept. For context, this ex wasn't ancient history. They broke up a few months before he met me. He had described her as emotionally unavailable, unreliable, someone who couldn't give him what he needed. And yet, she kept appearing in conversations. mostly during arguments. Subtle comparisons, small references, enough to notice, not enough to confront directly. Until now. I leaned back in my chair and looked at my phone, feeling something inside me go very still. Because anger, I understand. Frustration, I can work with. But this? This wasn't either of those. This was clarity trying to surface. I typed one word. Enjoy. Then I opened my banking app. Not out of impulse. Not out of anger. But because timing matters. We were 4 months away from legally binding ourselves to each other. Financially, emotionally, structurally. And he was choosing that moment to close something that should have been resolved years ago. Or before he proposed. Or before I said yes. The catering installment was due in 10 days. The final venue transfer scheduled for next month. Together, they represented a commitment that extended far beyond a dinner. I stared at the numbers for a moment. Then I froze the card. It takes less than a minute. No dramatic gesture, no irreversible action. Just pause. Enough to stop everything from moving forward while I evaluated what was actually happening. Then I drafted an email to the venue, requested a hold on upcoming payments, cited a personal matter, asked about cancellation terms. Clear, neutral, controlled. After that, I called my older sister. She's practical, direct, not easily swayed by emotion. I explained everything exactly as it happened. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "If he still needs closure from another woman this close to your wedding, you are not his first choice." That sentence didn't hurt. It settled something. Around 21:15, Julian texted again. "Dinner's going really well. You should relax." A smiley face. I didn't respond. At 23:48, another message. "We talked about everything. I feel lighter. This was really healthy." Healthy. That word again. Like labeling something made it automatically acceptable. There was still no acknowledgement. No recognition that this might be inappropriate, poorly timed, disrespectful. Just reassurance that I should feel differently. At 2 o'clock, I sent one message. I canceled the wedding. No explanation. No argument. Just the outcome. Then I turned my phone on silent, placed it face down on the dresser across the room, and went to sleep. And for the first time that night, everything was quiet. I woke up at 6:30, same as every weekday. The alarm was across the room where I always keep it, forcing me to get out of bed instead of reaching over and delaying the day. Routine matters, especially when everything else doesn't. When I picked up my phone, the screen was already lit. Notifications stacked on top of each other. 37 missed calls, most from Julian. The rest from his mother, his younger sister, and 2 numbers I recognized as his closest friends. There were messages, too. Dozens of them. I didn't open anything immediately. I went to the kitchen first, started the coffee machine, measured the grounds, watched the water heat. Then I came back and sat down and read everything. The first messages came shortly after 2 o'clock. Confusion. "What do you mean you canceled the wedding?" "Daphne, stop joking." Then irritation. "This isn't funny." "Pick up your phone." Then escalation. "You're being dramatic. Canceling everything over one dinner is insane." I kept scrolling. Around 3:10, the tone shifted. "Why is the card not working?" "I just tried to pay the photographer and it declined." That confirmed something important. He wasn't just having dinner with his ex. He was actively moving forward with wedding payments at the same time. 2 parallel tracks, one looking backward, one locking us into a future. Around 4 o'clock, the messages became sharper. "You're controlling. You don't get to punish me like this." Then closer to 5:30, the tone changed again. "Are you serious?" "We need to talk, face to face." "My mom is furious. You had no right to do this." I read everything twice. Not because I didn't understand, but because I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything. Any acknowledgement. Any reflection. There wasn't. Just reactions. I took a sip of coffee and opened my laptop, logged into the venue portal, and submitted the formal cancellation request. There was a penalty. Significant, but manageable. The contract was under my name. That had been intentional from the beginning. I handle legal agreements carefully. I don't leave structural elements to chance. This was one of those decisions paying off. At 7:15, I sent Julian a message. "The wedding is canceled. The card is frozen. We will meet today at 18 o'clock in a public place to discuss deposits and personal items. No emotion, no justification. Just logistics." Within seconds, my phone started ringing. I watched his name appear, then disappear. Then again, I didn't pick up. I wanted the first real conversation to be controlled, in person. Not a reaction at 7 in the morning, still standing in my kitchen. At 7:32, he sent a voice message. I didn't play it. I don't like voice messages. They allow people to hide behind tone instead of clarity. But the transcription preview showed enough. You're humiliating me. This is insecure. It was just closure. The same words, rearranged. Nothing new. Then his mother called. I answered that one. Daphne, how dare you? No greeting. No pause. Just accusation. I let her speak. She said Julian was devastated, that I was sabotaging my own future, that canceling a wedding over dinner was immature and embarrassing. When she finally stopped, I spoke. Calmly. I'm not comfortable marrying someone who feels the need to have dinner with an ex for emotional resolution 4 months before our wedding. There was a beat. Then she said, You're being controlling and dramatic. I took another sip of coffee. This isn't about control, I said. It's about standards. Then I ended the call. No argument. No escalation. At work, nothing changed. I reviewed plans, answered emails, attended a meeting about drainage capacity projections. My manager noticed I was quieter than usual, but he didn't ask questions. He doesn't need to. I have a reputation for being steady. That matters in moments like this. Around 10 o'clock, Julian sent a longer message. This one was structured, intentional. He said I was proving his point about my insecurity, that his dinner was about growth, that his ex had apologized, that he deserved that conversation, that I should trust him. Trust. That word again. I replied once. Trust is not blind approval of questionable decisions. It is mutual respect. You informed me. You didn't ask. There was a pause. Then his response came. You're twisting this to make me look like the villain. I was being honest. You're punishing me for that. I didn't reply. We had agreed to meet at 18 o'clock. That was where the conversation would happen. Everything else was noise. The hours between passed quietly. Not peacefully, but clearly. Every message he sent reinforced the same pattern. Deflection, reframing, positioning himself as reasonable, positioning me as the problem. By the time I left work, there was nothing left to analyze. The conclusion had already been reached. The meeting wasn't about deciding. It was about confirming. We met at a cafe near the station. Public, neutral, easy to leave from both sides. I arrived 10 minutes early, chose a table near the window. Visibility matters. So does exit strategy. At 18:07, Julian walked in. He didn't smile, didn't sit. He stopped across from the table, arms folded. I can't believe you actually did this. People were already looking. I gestured to the chair. Sit down. He hesitated, then sat. But the tension stayed. He started immediately. You blindsided me. His voice was controlled, but loud enough to carry. Canceling the wedding without talking to me? Freezing the card? That's cruel, Daphne. That's impulsive. I let him finish. Didn't interrupt. Didn't react. Then I asked one question. Why now? He frowned. What? Why did you need to have dinner with her now? He rolled his eyes. Because I needed closure. I'm not going to apologize for doing something healthy. Healthy. Again. Like repetition would make it true. I nodded slightly. Why didn't that happen 3 years ago? He opened his mouth, then closed it. I continued. Or before you proposed, or before we paid deposits, or before we involved our families. He leaned back. Timing doesn't matter. Emotional growth doesn't follow a schedule. And there it was. The difference. To him, emotions existed outside structure. To me, timing defines meaning. I looked at him steadily. To me, it does. He exhaled sharply. You're making this into something it's not. No, I said quietly. I'm recognizing what it is. The conversation had started. But the outcome was already set. Julian leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on me, like he was trying to force the situation back into something he could control. You're overreacting, he said. It was dinner, a conversation. That's it. I didn't respond immediately. I watched him. Not what he was saying, how he was saying it. Confident, certain, like the conclusion had already been decided and I just needed to catch up. That's not what I asked, I said. He exhaled sharply, irritation surfacing. I told you, I needed closure. I tilted my head slightly. From someone you described as emotionally unavailable, unreliable. That was before, he said quickly. People grow. Do they, I asked, or do they just reappear when it's convenient? His jaw tightened. You're twisting this. No, I said calmly. I'm asking you to be specific. There was a pause. Not long, but enough. Then he shifted. She apologized, he said, for how she treated me, for how things ended. I nodded once. And that mattered to you? Yes, he said, a little too quickly. Of course it did. Anyone would want that. Anyone, I repeated. He leaned back again, like he'd regained ground. Exactly. I held his gaze. And hearing that from her, How did it make you feel? That was when something flickered. Subtle, but real. He hesitated, then said, it felt validating. There it was, not closure. Validation. I let the silence stretch for a second. Then I said, and you needed that 4 months before marrying me. His expression shifted, defensive again. You're making it sound worse than it is. I'm not making it anything, I said. I'm repeating what you just said. He shook his head. This is exactly what I mean. You take something normal and turn it into a problem. I leaned back slightly, mirroring his earlier posture. No, I said. You take something significant and minimize it. He laughed. Actually laughed. Short, sharp, disbelieving. This is insane, he said. You canceled our wedding because I had dinner with someone from my past. I watched him carefully. It wasn't the dinner. Then what was it? He snapped. The fact that you treated it like it didn't require a conversation. He opened his mouth to respond, but I continued. You didn't ask. You didn't discuss. You informed me. And then you told me how I should feel about it. That was a joke, he said quickly. The don't get jealous thing. No, I said, cutting him off. It wasn't. He blinked, caught off guard. It told me you already decided my reaction would be irrational, I continued. So instead of addressing it, you tried to control it. That's not... It is, I said, still calm. And you've done it before. He went quiet. Just for a second. Then his expression hardened. So what, now I'm manipulative? I didn't say that, I replied. I said there's a pattern. He leaned forward again, frustration rising. You're unbelievable, he said. You're so rigid. Everything has to follow your rules, your timelines, your logic. I didn't react, because that part was true, but not in the way he meant it. I don't think expecting a conversation before meeting an ex 4 months before a wedding is rigid, I said. He scoffed. People have pasts, Daphne. Adults deal with them before they commit to a future, I replied. That landed. I saw it. A slight pause. A recalibration. Then he shifted again. Different tone. Softer. We can fix this, he said. Okay? Maybe I didn't handle it perfectly. Fine, I'll admit that. But canceling everything, freezing the card, that's extreme. I shook my head once. It's consistent. With what? He asked. With how I make decisions. He frowned. I don't react, I said. I assess. He stared at me like that was the problem. Relationships aren't engineering projects, he said. No, I agreed, but they do have structure. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. You were supposed to fight for us. There it was. I looked at him. What does that mean? I asked. It means, he said, sitting up again, you push back. You get angry. You tell me not to go. You show me you care. I held his gaze. You wanted a reaction. I wanted effort, he corrected. No, I said quietly. You wanted instability. He blinked. That hit. You wanted to see if I would compete for your attention, I continued. If I would try to stop you. If I would prove something. That's not fair, he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. It's accurate, I replied. He shook his head. You're reading too much into this. Am I? I asked. He didn't answer, so I did. You created a situation where you positioned me against someone from your past, I said, and then you framed my reaction as the problem. That's not what happened. It is, I said, because if I had reacted differently, if I had gotten angry, demanded you cancel, you would have called me insecure. He didn't respond. And because I didn't, I continued, you're calling me cold. That silence was longer. He looked away for the first time, out the window, then back at me. You're really going to throw away 3 years over this? I shook my head. No. Then what? He pressed. I'm ending 3 years because of what this reveals. He frowned. And what does it reveal? That we define commitment differently. He opened his hands, frustrated. Commitment doesn't mean you stop being a person, he said. It doesn't mean you can't have conversations, closure. It means you prioritize the relationship, I said. I did, he insisted. I chose you. I tilted my head slightly, after seeking validation from someone else. That's not what... You said it felt validating, I reminded him. He stopped, just for a second, but it was enough. That doesn't mean anything, he said finally. It doesn't change how I feel about you. It changes the context, I replied. He leaned back again, frustration turning sharper. You're impossible, he said. You analyze everything until there's nothing left. No, I said. I analyze until it's clear. He stared at me. Then his expression shifted. Something colder. Good luck finding someone who'll put up with this, he said. With you. There it was. Not frustration. Not confusion. Ego. I stood up. Slowly. Deliberately. We'll settle the deposits based on what's refundable, I said. I'll transfer your portion. Your things can be returned through a mutual friend. His eyes widened slightly. Yeah, you're serious. Yes. He stood too. You're making a mistake. I picked up my bag. No, I said. I'm correcting one. I turned toward the door. Behind me, his voice followed. You'll regret this. I didn't turn around, because regret wasn't what I felt. Clarity was, and for the first time since his message the night before, it was complete. The next morning I blocked him. Phone number first, then messaging apps, then email. Not out of anger, not even out of frustration. But because once a decision is clear, continued access becomes a liability. It creates space for negotiation, for emotional bargaining, for distortion. I don't leave structural weaknesses exposed once I've identified them. Within minutes, my phone started ringing again. Unknown numbers this time. I let them ring. Then came emails. The first one was from Julian. Subject line, please. Short, direct. You're being extreme. Blocking me proves you can't handle real conflict. Couples fight. They work through things. You're walking away because it's easier than dealing with your own issues. I read it once, then closed it. No response. The second email came an hour later. Longer, more deliberate. My father is disappointed. My family is asking questions. People already know something is wrong. You've embarrassed me. You've embarrassed all of us. That told me everything I needed to know. Not about the relationship, but about his priorities. Perception, reputation, control of the narrative. Around midday, his father called. From his office line. I answered that one. Out of courtesy. His tone was calm, measured. Daphne, he said, I'd like to understand what's happening. I explained. Not emotionally, not defensively, just facts. There was a pause. Then he said, Julian is upset. He may have handled things poorly, but canceling a wedding this close to the date, that's a serious decision. Yes, I said, it is. I think, he continued carefully, that you may be reacting too quickly. These things can be worked through. Perhaps you take a week. Let things settle. Then revisit the decision. I looked out the window. At the river. Still. Controlled. No, I said. A pause. Then, may I ask why not? Because the decision wasn't made quickly, I replied. It was made clearly. Silence. Then I added, the irreversible moment wasn't mine. It was his. He didn't respond immediately. Then quieter. I hope you reconsider. I won't. I ended the call. And blocked his number too. That afternoon, I finalized everything. Photographer, caterer, florist. Each conversation was brief, professional. Some deposits were non-refundable. I accepted that. Peace of mind has a cost. By evening, I transferred Julian his portion of what was refundable. No message. Just a note in the transfer description. Settlement complete. Clean lines. No ambiguity. For the first time since Thursday, my phone was quiet. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, a mutual friend texted me. What happened? Julian's telling people you had some kind of breakdown. I stared at the message for a moment, not surprised. Just unsurprised. Narrative control. Again. I replied with one sentence. He informed me he was having dinner with his ex for closure 4 months before our wedding and told me not to get jealous. I chose not to proceed. That was it. No adjectives. No defense. A few minutes later, he replied, That's not what he said. I didn't respond. I'm not interested in competing versions of the same story. People who know me don't need one. And people who don't matter. That evening, another email came through. A new address? Julian again. The tone was different this time. Quieter. I feel like you punished me for being honest. I read it. Continued. I didn't expect this to end everything. I thought you'd fight for us. I thought you cared enough to not just walk away. There it was again. That expectation. That love equals endurance. That commitment means tolerating instability long enough to prove something. I kept reading. I'll be honest, hearing her say she regretted losing me, it felt good. It made me question things. Not because I want her back, but because maybe I rushed into this. I stopped there. Read that sentence again. Slower. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed everything. If you're questioning whether you rushed into an engagement, you don't explore that over dinner with the person you used to date. You confront it before. Alone. Honestly. He ended the email with, I never meant to lose you. I closed the message. Didn't reply. Instead, I packed the rest of his things. A jacket, a book, a few toiletries he'd left behind. Put them in a box. Dropped it off with the same mutual friend. No note, no message. Just completion. By the end of the week, everything was done. No more calls. No more emails. No more noise. Just quiet. It's been 3 months. The venue refunded part of the deposit. The caterer kept theirs. Financially, it was manageable. Logistically, everything was resolved within 2 weeks. Emotionally, it was simpler than I expected. People ask if I regret acting quickly. I don't. If anything, I'm relieved. Because the dinner wasn't the first signal. It was just the clearest. Julian had a pattern. He framed situations as tests. If I didn't react strongly enough, I didn't care. If I reacted too firmly, I was rigid. The outcome adjusted, depending on what validated him in the moment. And that message, don't get jealous, it wasn't reassurance. It was positioning. It removed space for a reasonable reaction before I even had one. That's not communication. That's control. Marriage doesn't work like that. It requires shared assumptions, shared boundaries, shared definitions of what matters, without needing to negotiate every line. We didn't have that. About a month ago, a colleague asked me if there was a dramatic story behind the canceled wedding. I told him no. There was a misalignment, discovered at the right time. That's still how I see it. I haven't unblocked him. There hasn't been a final conversation. No attempt at friendship. Clean breaks are cleaner for a reason. If he needed validation from his past before committing to a future, he's free to pursue that path, fully. As for me, I prefer something else. Something quieter. Something steadier. Something that doesn't require performance to prove it's real. The night he texted me that he was meeting his ex, he probably expected an argument, raised voices, emotion. Instead, he got clarity.